Everyone. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the February meeting of the Fairfield Board of Finance. Would everybody please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? This evening, I'll ask Mrs. Esmia to lead us in the pledge. It's over here now.
It is. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
May I ask everyone to please remain standing for just a moment? We recently lost Mary LeClaire's mother-in-law. Brian LeClaire was a long-standing public official in town. His mom passed away within the last month. So our deepest condolences to the LeClaire family, and I'd like to hold a moment of silence in her honor. Thank you very much. And Mary, if you'd pass along our condolences to Brian, we would greatly appreciate it. Couple of other items tonight. Mr. Brown has taken ill and will not be able to join us. We wish him the best to recuperate. And Mr. Becker has a child care issue and will be with us momentarily, and I think the same from Mrs. Marmion as well. Tonight, on the agenda, we have the approval of the minutes of the January 2nd meeting. We have several different bond resolutions. The first item we have is the $250,000 for the clubhouse, which we've heard about a couple of times. The second, we have 5-year bonds, 10-year bonds, 20-year bonds. This is part of our capital non-recurring discussion that happens just before every budget cycle. The next item, the police chief would like some funds moved from the contingency account, so we'll speak to him. And then we're going to talk a little bit about what the budget calendar looks like tonight by department, as well as what it might look like in future years. And then I'm just going to announce the Board of Finance subcommittee assignments. We've been working on that. Thank you, Mr. Mottola, for your assistance on that as well. And then any other communications of which I don't know of any. Does anybody have any questions, comments, concerns on this evening? Seeing none, we'll start with the approval of the minutes of January 2nd, 2018 meeting. Can I have a motion to put that before us? We'll do Mr. DeWitt. Do I have a second? We'll do Ms. Esmia. And the item is now before us. Questions, comments, or concerns regarding the minutes for January 2nd? Seeing none, I'm going to call this item for a vote. All in favor of the minutes of January 2nd? Opposed? Abstentions? And I abstained because I was not at that meeting. Okay, item number 2 on the agenda. To hear, consider, and act upon the following resolution as recommended by the Board of Selectmen. Resolved that a bond appropriation entitled a resolution appropriating $250,000 for the costs associated with the planning, design, and obtaining cost estimates for the renovation or replacement of the clubhouse and golf barn at H. Smith Richardson Golf Course and for other site and ground improvements, and authorizing the issuance of bonds to finance such appropriations, consisting of 3 pages, be and hereby is approved. Do I have a motion to put this before us? Go with Mr. Walsh, second by Mr. Mottola. The item is now before us for discussion. Come on forward, Mr. Calabrese, and your team. Thank you, gentlemen, and welcome back again.
Thank you for having us. Anthony Calabrese, Parks and Recreation. Brian Scully, Chairman of the Golf Commission.
First of all, I want to thank you, gentlemen, for holding tours for various members who had not been up to the clubhouse previously, and we appreciate that, and thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome. We appreciate those that attended who haven't seen the course before coming up and taking a look as well. We appreciate it.
Sure. What's the update since last time we spoke?
So the update since last, I'm sorry, as like Anthony said, Ryan Scully from the chair of the Town of Fairfield Golf Commission. The update since that is that the RTM has appointed the building committee itself, so it is an official committee, which is great, and I believe that they're in the process of getting sworn in throughout the last couple of weeks. I know a couple of gentlemen here today who are members of the committee have previously been sworn in, and the first meeting is scheduled for February 13th, Tuesday next week. And I think we've gotten a pretty good response, so hopefully we'll have everybody attend that meeting. I will plan to be there myself as the liaison from the Golf Commission, as is the charge. And I believe that the Parks and Rec Chair will be there as well to be the liaison to the Parks and Rec Committee. So hopefully that will take place. So at this point, I think we're on the last step of what we talked about throughout the process, since we have been in front of you guys for a few times, and that's seeking the appropriation of the money per the resolution in front of the board today.
Thank you very much. Do we have questions, comments, concerns from board members regarding this item? Mr. Walsh, do you have something?
In regards to the budget, I mean, into the building itself and what you're going to be doing up there, number one, I appreciate the tour we had the other night. Thank you very much. I just want to make sure that we all think that there's enough money to do all the proper borings that need to be done, because I know there's talk about maybe putting the carts underneath the building, and so I know there's talk about moving the building itself and relocating, which I think is a great idea. But I just want to make sure there's going to be enough borings done at the site and that this budget will be able to cover that. To be able to know where ledge is and where it isn't.
Yeah. I think, I mean, my understanding is that was included in the initial projection, but if you'd like, we can call up some of the building committee folks who have just recently been sworn in that may be better equipped to answer it than I am, since they actually know about construction.
Yeah, I'm just not sure whether
just
the
the law.
borings are going to be done at the
Sure.
site where you might like to have it located, or whether they're going to be, there's enough are going to be done, like, even further away to exactly know the location and, I guess, the elevations of the ledge that may or may, I mean, I know there's some ledge there, as there's already been some testing.
So this is Mr. DiMartino, who is now appointed on the building committee and was kind of instrumental in preparing the request for design proposal that was sent to you folks as part of the backup, as well as some of the construction numbers. So I'm sure he's much more equipped to handle it than me.
Thanks. Yeah, Don DiMartino, and we had, I think there were 2 test pits done in the original plan in 2008. And to answer your question, I think there will be sufficient funds in the $250,000 to get a geotech consultant on board and do enough borings to encompass any area that we think we might build
Okay.
new.
And that'll not only tell us whether there's ledge, but also the elevations of that ledge?
Yes.
Okay.
So they would tell, whether it's soft rock, hard rock, whether it's just boulders, and you go down to a depth to tell you what the bearing capacity of the soil is, and that gives you the whole story. And shouldn't be a huge number if it's, within that 250, I'm sure we can accommodate that.
Okay. Because based on your last presentation, at least some of the ideas that are floating around of what might be done, I think it'd be great to be able to get rid of that, not only just get rid of that cold barn, but to be able to house everything within one building, including the carts possibly in the basement. Just because we wouldn't have to pay for 2 roofs over time and other things. So I'm hoping that your testing will show that
Hope we get good
somehow,
results.
in regards to locating that building, can be done and make it economically feasible.
They did 2 test pits in the old 2008 survey. Rock was about 2 feet below grade at the flagpole, which is right at the front entrance. And it was 9.6 feet below grade out towards where the boiler little hut is. So towards the street, it's a little deeper, but you never know in between. So that's why you have to take a lot and make sure you get the profile
Great.
of what you're up against.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? I had one. I'm looking at your schedule here, your cost estimates. Can you, first of all, Mr. Mayor, remind me, what was in the waterfall? It was a smaller number, correct?
3 million.
3 million.
That's what I thought. It wasn't
I'm trying to remember exactly.
it wasn't meant to be a stumper.
No, it was I don't know, 2 million, 3 million. It was a big number.
Okay, so it was $3 million. And step us through this schedule here, just so that we know what we're looking at, if you don't mind.
Okay. So what we did is,
Can you, I'm sorry, can you speak into the mic? Thanks.
what we did is option 1, that was the most up-to-date cost estimate to date back in 2008, because the engineers actually went through all the pieces and came up with $3,184,000 as the cost in 2008. What we did is we did a escalation study to see what construction costs have done over the last 10 years. We use the Turner Construction Building Cost Index, and we talk to architects and contractors to see what the cost per square foot was running at these days. So the factor that we applied to that was 1.23, which is actually, doesn't seem that high, but that's how it translated out. So that the 3.2 million in '08 is equivalent to 3.9 million in 2018. And that was the bare bones renovation scope. Then we took it 2 steps further. All new construction that would have going at $450 a square foot for new, and we took the estimates off to 2008 for the cart barn site work, projected them to 2018, came up with 4.8 million. And the next option was all new with a cart barn underneath, which is additional cost, and that would have estimated out at 5.8 million.
Now, is the 250,000 included in any of those numbers, or that's in addition to the 250,000,
That's in addition.
which is how I'm reading it? Okay.
So then, at that point, we said, okay, we know that design development estimates run at 4 to 5% of construction costs, and took the average 4.5%, and took the average of options 2 and 3, because we think it was unlikely that we're just going to go for a renovation, and it translated to the 238,000 with 12,000 for a construction manager to actually do a cost estimate, as opposed to just leaving it to the architect.
Thank you. Questions, comments from board members on these numbers? Mrs. Marmion.
They're not actually on the numbers, so if somebody wants to comment on the numbers.
Nope.
No, okay,
Go right ahead then.
okay. Thanks, and thanks so much for the tour. It was very enlightening. I see an immediate need, a need that, not immediate, it's probably been a need for quite some time, so I do support this. We had some good discussion during the tour, and this is really to Mr. Calabrese, I guess. We had talked about the current concessionaire. There's a restaurant there. We talked about the options of, do you expand this? Do you make this into a banquet hall? This is more for Parks and Rec, obviously, in terms of facility that could be expanded, looking at cost benefit. Do we need it? Do we not need it? We also talked about this piece of property, which is stunning, and as a non-golfer, I would love to be able to access this. I know many people in the town would love to access this property for other things, and I know that your charge is golf, but this is really for Parks and Rec. How are you proposing to look at options for this property as you develop a plan for a golf facility? What is your plan? Are you going to run in parallel through your Park and Rec Commission to look at options for the property, including the concession and potential banquet hall? How will that work?
That's essentially how it's going to work. The building committee has 2 liaisons. It's got one is our chairman from the Golf Commission, and the other one is our vice chairman from the Parks and Rec Commission. We're going to be relaying information back and forth to both of those commissions. Parks and Rec is obviously very concerned about making that facility a 4-season facility all year round, maximize as much revenue as we can. So as the building committee is going through their different options, it'll be her job to try to squeeze some Parks and Rec things in there, or at least get us the pricing for what it would cost. And I know everybody's talked about a skating rink. If there was a skating rink up there, at least leave the space for it so we could develop it down the road if we're going to move the building. Again, just as an example. But yes, that's what we would do, and at that point, then we'd put together, a return on investment, what we think we could make up there as far as money goes. So
you'd be looking at things like parking, for example. How do you, account for potential additional, the need for additional parking spaces if you had a wedding, for example?
a larger
I'm
banquet
not
hall.
saying that you would, but if you would, so that when we actually see the plan from on the golf facility, are we also going to be looking at something from you just to give us perspective, or what's your timing in terms of giving us some plans for?
I think it's all going to depend on what the building committee puts together as far as the plan for the property itself, for the building, and what the options are, and then we'll look at it and say, okay, this is what we can do up there. If we put in a large banquet hall, we have to take into consideration the parking, and that is part of the plan, is to look at parking and improve upon it. Any large function we do up there right now, you couldn't have a wedding during a golf day, on a busy golf weekend. Right now, we don't have sufficient parking to do that, so we would have to expand the parking if that's something we wanted to do and expand the banquet hall there. So, yes, I think it's just a matter of what the plan's going to be, and then I will present information with that as well. So,
Any other questions, Mrs. Leclerc?
How long do you think the plan and design phase will take?
Design phase, first thing we would do is, once the money's approved, go out and get quotes from probably several local architects. And I would anticipate 3 months minimum to get through the conceptual. And the way we kind of wrote up the RFP is they do the conceptual phase, give us 3 options, and we start, just reviewing back and forth to see, narrow in on the preferred design. Then they do the schematic phase, do a cost estimate, get all the comments from all the bodies, give it back to them, and they go to the design development phase that can generate the cost estimate. So I'd say at least 3 months, 3 to 4 months.
Okay, but you would plan to come back to us then within the year to,
Yeah.
London?
Yeah, I don't want to speak on behalf of the building committee since it hasn't met yet, but one of the things that we had talked about was coming up with a plan to update whichever bodies in town, including this, wanted it maybe once a quarter, or maybe not that frequently, depending on how fast things are moving. But I know that seems to be one of the bigger concerns for this board as well as the RTM, is to make sure that you guys have visibility what's going on. And I think everyone on the building committee that I've spoken to, very sensitive to that, very sensitive to being good stewards for the initial money that you provide, as well as any additional monies that you appropriate down the road. So I think that will probably be part of the plan. Again, I'm not even a voting member, so I don't really want to speak for them, but I believe that was part of the plan that we were going to try to implement as we move forward.
And then I just want to mention that when you do come back for funding, what will be very important to me is to see your revenue estimates and how you think things will, if we can improve our revenue and how doing this project will help that. And I guess I was kind of interested, I know you discussed it a little bit on Saturday and you didn't think it could fit, but that you would still investigate that option of the practice area, I don't know what exactly it's called. The practice
Driving
area
range?
for buckaballs.
Well, yeah, definitely could not, candidly, there's no way we could fit a driving range on the property, which is too bad because it would be a huge money generator if we could ever do it. But because of the open space, restrictions and things that we have up there, it just wouldn't happen. But we have discussed, other options where if we did put the cart barn carts underneath, for example, then maybe we could put some kind of small hitting area where the cart barn is now. I think there's things that we could talk about once we figure out what the design is going to be, but I think at this point I wouldn't want to promise that to anybody because I just don't think the space is there. You need 300 yards deep and roughly about 100 yards wide to put a range in. So.
It just sounded like it would be a really nice improvement. So.
Definitely would be.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Walsh?
In that regard, while we're still there, is there any way to trade property to give the trust back the property where the driving range is now, and in exchange for taking some of their property that's contiguous with our property at the driving range, put a driving range right on the property?
You're above my pay grade. I'm
right.
not sure about that, but
Well, maybe the first selectman could look into that, because it would be a lot more convenient. You'd make a lot more money there if the driving range could be there, and if maybe we could do a land swap. Something to look into. Secondly, in option 2, if you have to build the new cart barn, the 3,200 square foot, I presume you're going to have a cement floor of some sort,
Slab on grade, yeah.
a slab on grade.
Yep.
Is that going to be heated, or is that going to be
Barn
another
itself-
cold barn?
Didn't give it that much thought, but I think we would have to have some heat just so the carts were not subject to extreme
Last longer,
cold.
the batteries and all that stuff,
Yes.
right? Okay. But there'll be all the stuff kind of in a way that I saw last night, the charging stations under each one, lighting,
Right.
all
Yeah.
that stuff, right?
Water,
Water.
wash down and, right outside and.
The charging, obviously, that would have to be in there, all the electrical.
Okay. When I compare that against option 3, because it seems as though to put the carts underneath, the new underground cart barn,
Uh-huh.
it adds about $1 million to the project. And what I'm having a hard time understanding, and I know these numbers are rough, so maybe they
Yep.
just haven't been vetted, is that you're applying the same $450 square foot cost for basically a large basement, which does not have finish work, would have the same lighting that was going to be in the other place. So if I look at, you needed a slab floor anyway, so that's some of the cement work.
Right.
I look at lighting being pretty much the same, the electrical things being the same, all that electrical work being the same, but it's unfinished space. It seems to me that number is probably going to be on the high side, right?
That's a conservative number, I would agree. But,
Okay.
it has to include whatever underground unknowns you run into. Could be rock, we could be chopping into rock to get low. You'll have a retaining wall type structure to hold back the earth. You'll have a supported slab, a structural slab to support a heavy restaurant or kitchen load above. So the structure starts adding, quite a bit of money.
Okay. And if we don't do the cart, say we do the cart barn because we want to save $1 million, you're still going to be slab on grade for the regular building, correct?
Correct. No basement.
No basement. You'll just build, water lines will be built into the cement and underneath the slab and all that stuff.
Yes,
Okay.
and potentially a second story for whether it's a grill room or whatever we think is appropriate to overlook the 18th hole. We were talking about a two-story structure.
Okay.
Would help given the landscape.
So for the $250,000, you think we'll get enough to get more accurate numbers on this
Yes.
for all 3 options, or are you just going to be presenting numbers on the option that you guys choose?
Well, I think we need to vet out the options as you get up to the schematic design phase. So for all 3, you'd have a general rough order of magnitude at the conceptual phase. Then we narrow down maybe to 2, let them go with a schematic estimate to get it closer to see really where are the numbers falling. If it's a real sophisticated option 3 and it's 6-7 million, well, then we have a problem and we have
Sure.
to pull it back to the.
Okay. All right. I'm hoping that option 3 comes in a little less than,
It seemed that way.
well, it just seems as though that number's high at $450 square foot. I know the number could be all over the place depending on if you have ledge and what the cost to get through that ledge
Right.
would be, but let's see where it ends up. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Any other questions, Mr. Mottola, and then I'll go to Ms. Esmond.
For option 2 and 3, are demolition costs built in?
They are.
They are, okay. All right,
What's not built in is abatement,
gotcha.
and we don't know what we're going to run into. So that's a soft cost that has to be addressed.
Do you think, and I know these are estimates, but I know you did your best. For option 1, which is a renovation of the existing building, do you think that number might be a little higher since you are, when you're renovating an older building, you tend to run into things that you don't anticipate? Would that be a fair statement? Or an
You do,
unfair
but,
statement?
The building's a fairly simple building.
Yeah, it
block
is.
and wood, and I don't think there's a ton of unknowns that
Okay.
haven't been at least checked out at this
Gotcha.
phase.
All right, thanks.
Ms. Esmond.
Thank you for the tour. It was great. I don't recall what you said just last night about the, how much time is left on the contract with your concessionaire?
It's just a year-to-year, so it expires
Okay.
December 31st.
Okay, so, I mean, you
Sure.
you technically have an option to look for, or search for somebody else, or have others come and bid on the space?
I think the intent would be whatever new facility we do have, whether it's a renovation or new facility, would just be open to an open bidding process, and, invite whoever restaurateur wants to bid on it, I think that would be the process. We were very careful, Anthony's predecessor as well as Anthony, we've been very careful about making sure that the contract has remained year to year, just in case, we actually move forward with the project, and so we've continued to do that.
Okay.
So it would be an open bidding process, and I think we did talk about during the tour, and I think we talked about it here before, I think one of the things the building committee should look at is to see if there is some opportunity to get some outside investment as part of the clubhouse from a potential vendor. I think that's definitely something they could look at when they go through the process. Other towns have had varying degrees of success with that, some of the other public courses in the area. So I think that's something they would definitely want to take a look at as they move forward.
So when you present us with the estimates on revenue, you're just looking at what the market will bear now for
Yeah.
leasing,
this point,
investment
yes.
lease? Yeah, okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
I just presume that since the carts are electric, you guys are going to be looking at solar panels on top of the building and stuff like that for?
Yeah, I think it's a great opportunity for solar.
Yeah, it's definitely something we'll be looking at.
Okay.
Any other questions? Seeing none, I'm going to turn to the bond resolution itself. We do have bond counsel present for any questions. Does anybody have any questions on the bond resolution itself? This is a 20-year bond for this item. And it's pretty much, Mr. Mayor, our standard resolution, correct?
That is correct.
Any questions, comments, concerns from board members? Seeing none, I'm going to go to the public for any comments on this item. Briefly, come up to the microphone and state your name and your address if anybody has anything. Okay, I see none there. I'm going to call this for a vote. The item before us, resolve that the bond appropriation entitled a resolution appropriating $250,000 for the costs associated with the planning, design, and obtaining cost estimates for the renovation or replacement of the clubhouse and golf cart barn at H. Smith Richardson Golf Course, and for other site and ground improvements, and authorizing the issuance of such bonds to finance such appropriation, consisting of 3 pages, be and hereby is approved. All in favor of this item? Those opposed? Abstentions? Thank you, gentlemen. Good luck with your project.
Thank you very much for your time.
We look forward to the updates. All right. We're going to go to item number 2 on the agenda. We've got 3 in a row here that are non-recurring capital. We'll take each of these items separately. There's 5 years, 10 years, and 20 years. But what I will do is, as an introduction to this, I thought Mr. Mayor did a very nice job laying out a schedule that compares what's before us this evening versus what we talked about in the waterfall chart at our capital summit back in September. So I'm going to call the first item, but I'm going to ask that we go through that schedule just so that we get level set on kind of the global picture. Make sense to everybody? All right. So item number 3, non-recurring capital, 5 years. To hear, consider, and adopt a bond resolution entitled "A Resolution Appropriating $972,995 for the cost of certain non-recurring capital projects and authorizing the issuance of bonds to finance such appropriation." Can I have a motion to put that before us? Mr. DeWitt. I'll take a second from Mr. Mottola. The item is now before us, and I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Mayor and just have you briefly walk us through the schedules that I referred to, and then we'll go back and talk about individual items. Mr. Mayor.
So the schedules that the chair is referring to are Town of Fairfield Finance Department, has the boxes on the front of it. Just Schedule 1, very briefly, is Exhibit 1. It's just the projects and which ones are in the 5-year, 10-year, and 20-year bonding authorization requests based upon the life. And then a specific schedule that the chair addressed is Exhibit number 2. As you all know and attended, in September there was a capital planning workshop. On the right are the items that were discussed and presented, and nothing gets approved, but were discussed and presented as being appropriate for this coming fiscal year for this meeting for approval. Just going down the list, you can see the Fairfield Woods Library elevator is still here. The next 4, the Hulls Farms Road, the Brookside Bridge, the Southport Sidewalk Connect, and the Grasmere Avenue, and then skipping the golf course, the lighting for the tennis courts, those are not requested.
And why is that,
And
Mr.
tho-
Mayor?
that is not because of any financial or budget issues. That's because I know on the construction ones, it's basically just apparently they're not ready yet, but there's DPW, Joe Michelangelo's here, who can probably address those more specifically. But it's my understanding they're just not, timing isn't.
Yeah, Mr. Michelangelo, please just speak to the ones that fell off the list and let us know what the status of those. You don't need to go into great amounts of detail since they're not before us, but what's going on with those items?
Sure. Yes, so all those items, and Bill Hurley handles most of those items for the Public Works Department. And let me turn to the page, but basically they're at this stage now where they're not ready to apply for the state reimbursements for that portion of the funds. So they're all funded in part and in large part by state funding through the Connecticut DOT, and they're not at the stage yet where we're ready to do that. Once again, so they're probably all several months away, so they haven't gone away. They're just not ready for this cycle right now,
So these might be items that come back before us next year.
or probably much sooner than that.
Okay, so during the course of the year, you might come back for individual bonds related to these items.
Correct.
Okay, anyone have a question specifically on the items that are being left off here for now? I just wanted to set the context. Thank you, Mr. Michelangelo. Can we also ask about the lighting on the tennis courts? What's the status on that? I would imagine that's Mr. Calabrese.
We're going to try to get some more life out of them. We don't get any additional revenue because we have a long-term lease with the tennis center, so we dropped it off the schedule for now.
So again, this is a delay, not a removal.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Any questions on that item for now? Thank you, gentlemen. We appreciate that. Mr. Mayor, back to you.
And then to the left side of the schedule, thank you, Mr. Chair. So you see, again, the library elevator, the golf course renovation, the floor jacks, skipping the command vehicle for a second, the tide gauge design, and the data center relocation. Those were discussed in September and remain on the schedule. The command vehicle is new. That is our normal process with respect to vehicles is to take them out of the operating budget. This was presented as a non-recurring because it's a once every 5-year item, and it's over $100,000.
And that's in accordance with our bonding policy, is that correct? Our capital expenditure
That is
policy?
correct.
Okay. Let's go to the Board of Ed side then, Mr. Mayor.
And Mr. Cullen, I think, is here to address that.
Thank you, Mr. Cullen. Please come on up. And once again, please talk about the items that have been removed.
Thank you very much. The two items that were removed is good news. 2 years ago, we started a roof warranty investigation for Roger Little Middle School in McKinley. Their warranties were expiring in 2017. The original manufacturer of the roofs is Firestone. They didn't actually have a roof warranty extension program. So we were working with Garland Manufacturing, who helped us with our other roofs 5 years ago. We just recently learned with our PM contractor that Firestone is going to do a roof warranty extension at like 3 cents a square foot of repairs, and we can handle that with our operating budget. So we will get an extension on both roofs for very, very little money. So we were able to remove those.
Thank you very much. Let's go over to, so the other three items are labeled as number one, so they're being brought over and being asked for. And then you had an addition of the IT switch replacement. How did that come up?
Well, that actually was brought up at the summit back in September.
Yeah, it wasn't on the schedule though, right?
Right.
So what's the?
So the Board
remind
of
us?
Finance at that time asked us to add it to the waterfall. We were asked if we could do it in 2 years versus 1. So we did split that and added that into the waterfall.
Okay. Are there any questions, comments? Now, not about, we're going to get into the specifics of the items in a couple minutes, but there's any questions about the schedule or anything? I thought that was a good level set. If we look at it, we're $500,000 below where we thought we were going to be on the Board of Ed, and we're about $1.6 million on the town side below. That being said, these items largely will come back before us. They are not going away. They're being delayed. Okay? With that in mind, let's go back to the specific items that make up the $972,995, and I think the bulk of that is the IT switch, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, so let's go back, well, that would be bulk, right? Let's go back and talk about the IT switch. Hello.
Hello.
Nice to see you again. Please, please step us through this, remind us of our discussions.
Well, what we did last September was we came forward with the switches because we had, the last time, roughly 9 years ago, when we upgraded the LAN switches at that point, there was a move by, I believe it was Mr. Walsh who had recommended it, that we take $500,000 from the operating budget of the board and bond the half of the portion of the switches that were due that year in order to fund an IBNR conversation that was going on at the time. So given the circumstances and the capital pressure on the operating budgets, we thought there was precedent, so we brought forward the fact that we need to do this again. The switches are at end of life. They are at capacity. They're going to prevent us from moving forward with additional wireless access to support our students and our curriculum, and the use of cloud resources, which in turn also save us money. So we approached the Board of Finance last September and proposed the question, because we don't normally bond technology, if, given the time frame, you would be amenable to consider it.
And that project is in the booklet, starts on page 19.
Does anybody have any, thank you for reminding us, does anybody have any questions on this item? Mr. DeWitt?
So just so I'm clear, maybe just for our board, did we told you to bond this?
You
Did
agreed
we
that we
specifically
can
tell you to
bring-
bond this?
you-
Because it is in compliance with our bonding.
We asked basically permission to bring it forward, and we were encouraged to do so.
As a bond.
Yes, with the understanding that, in a longer-term thing, I think someone, it may have been yourself, suggested that this was similar to paving the roads, and that we had an immediate need, and then we should start thinking of
Doesn't sound like
building
me.
it in. Well, sorry.
I know, but
I understand
by our
that.
rules, right, as you accurately quoted, we don't bond any technology unless it's associated with the renovation or the upgrade of a school or.
I do believe the
building.
conversation, if I recall it properly, was that this is really infrastructure. So
Correct.
it's unique in the idea of technology in that it's not the kind of thing that you replace every year. Usually you're expanding year after year, and you're not necessarily replacing. But periodically, you have to go back and you have to update,
Well-
and that's where we're at.
And it is infrastructure. It does have a useful life over the bonding life,
Yes,
and it is a large item.
yes, correct.
Okay? Any other questions, comments, concerns on this item? Seeing none, I'll go to the public. Does the public have any comments on this? Mr. Dwyer, do you have anything you want to say, or Dr. Jones, anything you need to say? Yes, go ahead, Ms.
So I just want to make sure, if we're doing this in kind of a phased period, is there concern that by the time, 5 to 7 years, by the time we want to upgrade, that the technology will have changed overall? Is that a concern?
Well, it's a 2-year project to actually implement the upgrade. We do expect that there will be a good 5 to 7 year life of the product. We're pushing 10 on the existing. So I don't anticipate an issue with that. Even if it goes off the retail market that we participate in, usually you can get refurbished equipment if you need to make do. We've been doing that for several years with the current equipment that we have. It's just that we're getting to the point of sophistication now that it's holding us back. There are different components available in the switches that are here today, and they're more efficient from a power perspective as well, that we need to take advantage of. They also are smaller in form factor, meaning the space they take up, and we have certain closets that are maxed out. We can't add drops to them, which means we can't add wireless access points, which in turn support the computers the kids are using. So we really need something that's smaller to be able to expand in those areas.
So your question was basically, are we going to get the useful life out of this equipment before it's made obsolete? And your answer is, we're going to get it for the 5 to 7 years. Anybody else? Anything?
I would support this, and I mean, I think it goes even to more infrastructure because of the change that we're making into the VoIP phone system. So even more so in regards to supporting their infrastructure. I think this is right for all the reasons that they listed, but I think additionally just because of the transferring into the VoIP phone system where they're actually going to need more capacity.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Mr. Becker?
Yeah, I'm inclined to support it in that we need it at this point and that it has been pushed back. But I think this item, and there are some others that are in here that have some pretty, right over the threshold sort of dollar amounts that to some degree really should have ultimately been inside of the actual budgets or should be inside of budgets. And so by bonding them, we're sort of just creating, it's just a maneuver to create an artificially low budget number or ultimate tax rate that spreads it out, ultimately causing the pain in different ways. Might get you out of today, but so I'm a little bit concerned about it, but I know we need it. I know that we're at a point, and I think it loosely fits into that sort of guideline. As much as we don't like it, we've done a few times in the past for similar reasons. So, and yeah, with the VoIP system coming, I don't see how you don't get moving on this and quickly to ensure that we don't have a problem in a pinch at that point, and that's something we desperately need.
I'd like to say that I actually think this is an example of our policy working, right? Because the policy is a guideline that we put together to make sure that we're not trying to dump things into a capital budget that should be an operating budget. And when you're looking at a $2 million project that has a useful life of 5 to 7 years, and as Mr. Walsh says, and if you've articulated, is infrastructure related, to allow us to use all the other items that we've already purchased, I think it's perfectly appropriate for bonding this item in my estimation. Anybody else? Any members of the public? Again, one more time? Nothing. Seeing none, I'm going to call this for a vote. Non-recurring capital, 5 years, to hear and consider and adopt a bond resolution entitled, "A Resolution Appropriating $972,995 for the cost of a certain non-recurring capital project and authorizing the issuance of bonds to finance such appropriation." This is a 5-year bond resolution. All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? That item carries. Thank you very much. All right. We'll go to the non-recurring capital, 10 years. To hear, consider, and adopt a bond resolution entitled, "Resolution Appropriating $306,000 for the cost of certain non-recurring capital projects and authorizing the issuance of bonds to finance such appropriations." Do I have someone put it before us? We'll go with Mrs. Marmion. We'll go to a second. Mr. DeWitt, the item is now before us for discussion. There's several items that make this up. What's the board's pleasure for taking these items? We can go one by one.
Might as well start with Mr. Collins since
Okay.
he's sitting here.
Sure.
All right, the project we're going to discuss in the 10-year bond area starts on page 6. This is the information technology and electrical upgrade project. This is the phase 2 of a 2-part project that we took on last year. We funded and bonded $200,000 to do all of the elementary schools. This request is $200,000 to do the secondary schools. It's changing out the old Cat 5 wire with Cat 6 wire infrastructure and adding a quad outlet, electrical outlet, versus the duplex outlet that's in place.
Just curious, in the project we just discussed, the switches, you did the secondary schools first and then the elementary schools. This one you did the elementary schools first and now the secondary. Why do we do it that way? Just
There was more demand at the elementary school level that needed to be addressed than there was at the secondary level.
because of what? What was driving the demand?
Usage of the projectors and the ability and the staffing that we have to support the projectors at the elementary level is less than we have secondary. We have actually dedicated technicians at each of the secondary sites, whereas in the elementary, we have 3 technicians who cover all 11 schools. So there's a lot of manual interface. Part of this project is giving us the ability to remotely manage what's going on in the classroom. So if a bulb's starting to go out, we get a report that we need to take advantage of getting out there before the bulb actually goes to replace it. If there is an adjustment or recalibration of the projector that needs to take place, we can actually use remote controls to do that with some of the projectors. And that was more of a need at elementary, and that's why we picked them first.
Thank you. And I'm going to go right to Mrs. Marmion's question from last time. Is there any shot that when we do this, we're going to, this is for 10 years versus 5 years, so we're going to outlive is the bond going to outlive the useful life here or the technology?
I don't perceive that to be the case, although, we are looking at what we would call interactive displays now as opposed to using projectors. But that said, it took us almost 10 years to get all of our classrooms fitted with projectors. I don't see us migrating quickly to that technology. It's not really proven yet. We've got basically, I think, 4 units currently in play. So it may be a phase out over time, but you are talking about power and cabling, and the way things are going, I'm sure we'll use that in some other direction if we no longer need it for this particular purpose.
Thank you. Questions, comments from board members on this particular project? All right. Seeing none, we'll take up the second item. Thank you, and please stay with us. Stand by. The second item under the 10-year bond is the command vehicle for the fire department. I saw the fire chief here earlier. Good evening, Chief. Welcome. Please come on up. And as you will recall, as Mr. Mayor articulated earlier, this item was not part of our discussion last September. So welcome, gentlemen.
Good evening. Dennis McCarthy, Fire Chief, and Deputy Chief Dunn from the Fire Department. Yes, this is a vehicle that is in our capital replacement plan for rolling stock. It's been in our matrix for replacement. We have a history of replacing this vehicle every 5 years, which allows us to turn over the retired vehicle to our frontline reserve, and it serves as a backup to the car and allows us to make that move prior to 100,000 miles on the car. It gives us better serviceability of the vehicle and a reliable reserve vehicle for when we need it.
Questions, comments from board members on this item? Mr. Walsh.
Is the new one going to be different from the ones we've had?
Yes. So
Explain that.
So we have in the past historically used a Chevy Suburban.
Yeah.
We saw the prices for Chevy Suburbans skyrocket. The cost of the vehicle, just the base vehicle, if we stayed with the Suburban model, the cost of the vehicle alone would be $75,000. We made the decision, as many of our counterparts in neighboring communities, to go to a pickup, gasoline-powered pickup with a cap, and the base cost of the vehicle is $45,000. So we're able to modify our approach and save some money, and it has the added benefit of all of the contaminated equipment gear is in the bed of the truck as opposed to in the passenger compartment as an added benefit.
The equipment that you have listed in the proposal, is that the same equipment that we currently have in the Suburbans?
Correct.
That's correct.
Okay, same stuff.
Yep.
Okay. Great. And have we bonded this before this vehicle?
No, it has appeared in the past in our operating budget, and it has been in the past less than $100,000.
Okay, how much has it been in the past?
We weren't here for for the last vehicle.
So it probably $60,000 to $75,000.
Why is this one so much more expensive?
Just the cost of the vehicle and the cost of equipment that goes in it.
Well, what's, to Mr. Walsh's point, I mean, that's a heck of an increase, right? In the cost, if it was 60 to 70,000 to go to 106, what's the differential? It went up by 80, 90% since we last bought one.
So what we've seen is the base cost of the vehicle has gone up, although we've made some adjustments. And the equipment package that we put in, the radios are much more expensive. We've seen an increase in the portable and mobile radio cost has gone up almost double over that period. There is some additional equipment that may have not been part of the past package, like the cardiac compression device, thermal imaging cameras that are part of this package for the fire and rescue equipment.
So there is new equipment in there?
So the fire and rescue equipment is a catch-all, and not having a good understanding of what that package looked like in the past, I know that there are items in this package that didn't exist before. The cardiac compression device is a very good example. That is not technology that was available. It's not a piece of equipment that the department used when we bought the previous vehicle.
But we're going to be retiring one vehicle, right?
Yes.
Okay.
How
So
old is that vehicle that we're retiring?
It's a 2002.
Yep.
Okay.
And can't the equipment, fire and rescue equipment that's in there, be moved over?
So
A hard time understanding.
So when we purchase a vehicle, we purchase not only the vehicle, but the equipment that goes in it. Gives us an opportunity to replace antiquated equipment that is at its end of cycle. So we keep a frontline vehicle fully equipped. We keep a replacement or frontline reserve fully equipped with older gear, and then that third vehicle will get retired. So
And what happens to the equipment that's in the old vehicle?
any equipment that is available for reuse is part of our maintenance division. Will evaluate all of it, put it on a reserve piece of equipment, and balance all of the equipment over all of the fire apparatus that we maintain, both the frontline equipment and the reserves. It allows us to buy new equipment without a separate line in the budget, and with the replacement of the vehicle. It is something that we do with fire apparatus as well.
It just seems, you guys are pretty good at keeping your equipment up to date, which I think you should. And it just seems as though I would doubt that some of that equipment that's on there is just not up-to-date stuff.
Correct.
I mean, you guys are very good about keeping track of all your maintenance, the hours, not going an hour over, getting the stuff when you should, which I think you should. But it just seems to me that there's probably some stuff on that vehicle that's certainly not 15 years old.
Right.
That can be used. I don't understand why it can't even be transferred over.
But it will get there, when you think of all of the vehicles that we maintain, the equipment is similar on on pumpers, ladder truck, rescue truck, and the command car. All of those vehicles carry similar equipment. Part of that process that you talked about is retiring those pieces of equipment. So something that comes off the command car may go to a reserve pumper, and that piece of equipment may get retired as being the oldest in our fleet.
But sitting in my seat, that all sounds good. I'm not saying that you're going to waste any of this stuff. But that means that and when I see the budget, I should be seeing a line go down for some of that equipment then, because that's normal stuff you would have purchased in this year's coming budget. Am I not correct on that?
If I may, I want to just make sure, I'm not positive that the equipment that becomes unusable is 10 years old, because they always have two command cars in play at all times. So the car that's being retired is a 10-year-old car. So the equipment that would be retired, I think what you're saying, is 10-year-old equipment, not
But I'm not hearing that they haven't replaced
Right,
that over
exactly.
time. I mean, if the chief and these guys want to make a representation that everything on that car is 10 years old and that it's at the end of its useful life, are you making that representation?
No, we,
Okay.
we manage all of the equipment across the entire fleet.
Yes.
And what this does is gives us one of these pieces of equipment to retire the oldest of that type off of any one of the dozen pieces of equipment that we have. And we don't have major lines replacement for some of this equipment. It doesn't appear in our operating budget because we replace it as we replace apparatus if it needs to be replaced.
And items like the thermal imaging camera and the pack tracker, we'll buy, you know, the new items, and they're mounted with the new mounts. The new items have new chargers, so it's not like it's mix and match. So what we'll do is we'll just, you know, we'll set this vehicle up. The existing vehicle will move back with all the equipment that was in it, and that one that was behind that, all that equipment in the one that was behind that, that vehicle will just become a utility vehicle, but all that equipment that is in that is as we said, it's like 10 years old or you know, older.
Now, okay, I'll take a break. if you want.
Yeah, let's go, I think Mr. DeWitt, and then we'll go to Mrs. Marvin.
Thank you. I'm concerned because your statement that we've never bonded this before, and the only reason we're bonding it today is because you hit a $100,000 threshold. You also said $45,000 vehicle without anything gets to $106,000. So there's more money in equipment than there is actual vehicle. So I hope we're not trying to pump that number up to get to that 100,000. But as per our bonding and capital, this is not allowed. The only equipment in quote, certain non-recurring vehicles we allow for 10 years are, as we call it, fire trucks and unusual heavy machines. We specifically say we won't bond we won't bond police cars, road repair vehicles. So I don't think this qualifies under our bonding policy, frankly. And again, I'm a little suspect that we're just creeping over that $100,000 to get it into capital. So I don't know if I can support this in this, at least this one. The first piece I can't support the $106,000 for the car.
Thank you, Mr. DeWitt. Mrs. Marmion.
Thank you. Mr. DeWitt got right to my point. I was wondering the rationale for why we were putting this in the 10-year bonding. Is it simply because it met that $100,000 threshold, and that's why it's not going to appear in the requested operating budget? So I'd like clarification on that policy. If that's truly our policy,
our
then
policy.
I would say that this is doesn't apply.
The base, just as a point of order, the base criteria is we don't bond anything under $100,000. Then there's categories with which they fall, and then there's a whole lot of exclusions or exceptions to that too. So we can get you a copy of this for sure. Everyone should have a copy of this, frankly.
Yep, Mr. Mottola.
So, and I understand what everyone's saying, but what I guess the chief, maybe Bob, is saying is that this, you're looking at this not just as a vehicle, but a vehicle with what you would consider to be very important equipment for your department to fulfill its functions, right?
So the vehicle by itself does not support the mission
Right.
of the command car. The command car is, and it is more appropriate and less expensive, although it's a very expensive vehicle, less expensive for us to cobble together the equipment, install it, so we're not buying from the manufacturer. We could go to a manufacturer and say, we want this car with all of this equipment mounted in it, and it would be significantly
money.
more expensive. The way that we approach this, and much of our equipment, including fire apparatus, is we buy the vehicle and have funding flexibility within the request to buy the equipment that we then purchase at a lower unit cost and install by our maintenance division as a method to save money and make the appropriated funds go as far as they can, and gives us the flexibility to ensure that they are installed exactly to our needs and specifications. The vehicle is the collection of equipment that goes with it that constitutes the command capability.
Right. So if we looked at this as a package, it would comply with our policy. Is that a fair statement? Anyone could answer that.
If I may, to elaborate on Mr. DeWitt's comments. Item number 7 in the policy on bonding and capital purchasing says the following list represents the recommended bonding period for capital expenditures. Then it's got 20 years, then it's got 10 years. Equipment and certain non-recurring vehicles. When I allowed this to be included, to me it falls under that category. It's a non-recurring vehicle. It's once every 5 years.
But isn't it a piece of equipment? Isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like a car. It's like you could say a police car
Is non-recurring.
is non-recurring.
Well,
Because you know
we
what?
buy 'em
you know
every-
what? We buy it
we can-
every 3
I don't
years.
wanna- I don't-
I'm
I
in the middle of talking, but we buy a police car and we replace it like every 3 or 4 years. So that's non-recurring too.
Could I say something on
Anything
that?
that's not bought every single year is actually non-recurring.
We can have a discussion about this. I'm just saying the logic and the rationale. To me, it seemed to fill either way. You wanted to take it. You can see it's a non-recurring. It's once every 5 years. We buy police cars every year. We buy certain cars every year. So I'm just explaining the rationale. I'm not here to argue for or against.
Right. Chris, you had something?
Mr. Mayor quoted the policy correctly, but there's a footnote associated with 10 years, which says, examples, fire trucks and unusual heavy equipment.
Right. It says examples. It doesn't say all-inclusive. It doesn't say all examples.
So,
Okay, but later on, we also say that we will not bond police cars.
Correct.
So
I would say
it's
this
an
is.
equivalent vehicle, if you ask me.
Could I talk about
Yeah, you can-
terming
you can
it as a police car? This is a little different. This is almost to us like a fire truck. It's an unusual heavy vehicle. It's a little heavier than usual. It carries our equipment. It's not a staff car. It's something that we'll use 24/7 for fire response. It'll be at a fire scene, idling the whole incident, and they'll be operating out of it. It's a vehicle where we have, where we'll use it first line for 5 years, we'll use it in that second line for 5 years, and as a utility use for 5 years. So I just don't want you to think that it's a short-term thing that we're going to throw away. And this is also something, this vehicle has, it's got about $20,000 worth of communications equipment, $15,000 worth of lights and sirens and all that.
how many of these do you presently have?
One.
No, you have two.
No, front line, we have one, and then we
Okay,
have the backup.
But you're, okay.
Then we have that backup.
Okay,
which
so is the backup used?
Yes, the backup is used, number one, if the first line car goes out of service for
Sure.
mechanical. It's also used if there's a major fire right now where we have, the incident commander is working out a fire for an extended period of time, and we have to call in another incident commander to cover the town. So in emergency situations, that car is ready to go. There's another car that used to be that car, right now that's got nothing in it, and it's used to move equipment around, or if we need a staff car.
You got three of them, two of them are being used, one's not. One's
is
being
just
used part-time.
One is, just a utility.
Okay, so we're trying to bond this thing over 10 years when the one we currently have is just at 5 years, and we want to send it to the backup and then bond another one over 10 years. It seems like, I've got multiple problems with this one. It seems like the bonding length doesn't make sense with the utilization of the vehicle. I share the other concerns over this thing should be bonded whatsoever. And the third thing is I still haven't gotten an answer as to why the expense on this thing went up to $106,000 from $60,000 to $70,000 last time it was purchased, right? All those items give me pause to do this, plus it's the first time we've ever bonded something like this, and yet we've been with the police cars, and granted, they're different vehicles, I get it, but A, we've been keeping them in the operating budget, and B, we've been knocking down the numbers for a number of years. And the last item is, this thing we have another year until this thing hits 100,000 miles, 96,000 miles. So why wouldn't we delay another year, make sure we've got the appropriate items, make sure it's within either the operating budget or appropriately within the capital budget, and come back with why the costs have increased more. That's where I'm coming up. It's not that I don't want you to have the best equipment available to help you do your jobs. I most certainly do. But this thing trips a whole bunch of traps for me as I think about it. Mr. DeWitt?
With all due respect, Chief, when I hear the other chief in the back talk about police cars, I hear him say, there's a bunch of specialized stuff in there, there's a bunch of really high-tech radios, there's lights, there's all this stuff. So I know that the police officers, have SUVs. They're on scene. I get it. I see, frankly, a lot of similarities between a police vehicle and a fire vehicle. I mean, I know a little bit about fire vehicles. So I can't make the differentiation between this and a police car, as we call it in here, a police vehicle. If you want to,
Okay, well, I think the police vehicles that we have are basically one-person vehicles. They don't, it's one-person patrol cars. They're a little bit different. This is where our shift commander and his tactical aide go to the scenes of fire emergencies, but they have to keep a lot of equipment in the car. They keep their air masks and their all the equipment that they have. They've got to keep chargers and thermal imaging cameras, pack trackers. They've got to keep their air masks. There's a lot more equipment in the typical fire command vehicle and all across the United States. And this is the size that no police department would need a vehicle of this size. This is a little different. We also our neighbor. We want to be interoperable with all our neighbors, and so we have to have multiple radio bands in these vehicles so that we can talk to Bridgeport, who's on a different band. We can talk to the state. We can talk to other Norwalk when we go there. So there are, I assure you, there are differences between the typical patrol car and this vehicle, and we would be happy to show you. But
Okay. This operates as a mobile command post, and I think that's what the deputy is trying to allude to, which makes it different than a patrol car. It's a heavy-duty piece of equipment. It's a piece of fire apparatus more than it is a car. It comes with equipment that is unique to that command function. Where it ends up in the capital budget or the operating budget is not our business.
Yeah.
Exactly.
We represent the need.
Exactly right.
We represent the need to the fire department.
No, we appreciate that.
And I would suggest that regardless of the direction that we go, that this be a purchase this year, because by the time that we do get it, we will have tipped over 85,000 miles, and given the demands on our maintenance division and some of the work that we're doing in the maintenance division with older pieces of equipment, some of the rust challenges, what we don't need is another maintenance headache. And
That's why we're replacing your jacks.
Thank you, sir.
So,
So that's a yes on the jacks.
From me, absolutely.
so if I still have the floor, may I make a motion?
Absolutely.
I'm still-
Oh,
Oh,
go
I'm
ahead.
sorry.
And I hear you, Chief, and I agree. It's not, it's about whether you need the vehicle. I'm just saying from where I'm sitting and what we've done before, this should be in your operation. It's a great time that we have this discussion because the first selectman hasn't set his budget yet. So if you really need the vehicle, I would talk to him and have it put in the operations budget. But I don't think it meets what we've been doing in the past and where we should be going with this, and that we put it here every 5 years. I think it should be put in your operations budget. We need to have one of these every 5 years, and that's where it should be. But if you certainly, I think you need a command vehicle, and we've always tried to give you all the latest equipment and to keep you up to date, but I just think it should be in your operations budget. And I think you should talk to the first selectman about that.
Mrs. Leclerc.
I wanted to clarify something too, is because we're changing.
The fortunate thing is that we are not the first fire department to make this change. The city of Norwalk is now on their second pickup as a command vehicle. City of Bridgeport is using this design, as are other fire departments. And it actually it holds up better because it's on a truck chassis and gives us greater reliability and service life. So I think that it will be equal to or better than the Suburban.
Thank you.
It seems to me it would be more accessible for your equipment on the sides and stuff
is,
like
yes.
that as well,
Yes.
as opposed to being an enclosed body.
yes.
Okay.
Mr.
It looks better.
Thanks, Mr. DeWitt. Mr. Matola, let's go to Mr. Matola first, because I have a feeling where Mr.
I'm
DeWitt's
real quick here. If you got this vehicle, just want to understand it, it would be in operation for 10 years. The first 5 years would be the primary vehicle, and then the next 5 years would be the backup vehicle.
Yes, and then the next 5 years would be utility use.
So there's 15 years of use.
Absolutely, yes, or more.
And I know that I don't know whether you've all made up your minds regarding the bonding issue, but we do get, as Mr. Mottola points out, a very long period of use of the vehicle, and this represents a major spike in the fire department's budget. You know, we carry a capital budget line for equipment of $38,000. So it does represent a significant spike in our operating budget. Not that may or may not change your opinion of the project, but you know, from a funding perspective, we have worked very hard with our budget to flatten out those spikes, to anticipate and program our replacement so that we're doing it over a long horizon, a little bit at a time where we need it. This is a very big piece of equipment. It's a piece of fire apparatus, and it's an unusual, I think that it meets the definition of unusual heavy-duty piece of equipment.
Thank you, Chief. We're going to go to Mr. DeWitt.
I'd like to make a motion, the resolution before us to amend number 1, under number 1, that the the town of Fairfield hereby appropriates a sum of change from $306,000 to $200,000. In number 2, shall borrow a sum not to exceed from $306,000 to $200,000, and under Exhibit A, remove item number 1.
Do I have a second to that motion? I have a second from Mr. Walsh. Any other questions, comments? Mr. Mottola?
I'm going to support it this time around, but I think the next time this type of vehicle comes before us, I think we need to have a serious discussion about how we're going to fund this vehicle, because I agree it's a fire apparatus type vehicle, and the price is only going to go up. And it's going to, you're going to take a big hit in your operational budget if you have to fund a vehicle like this. So I just think we need to keep that in mind the next time we have to look at this type of a vehicle.
Thank you, Mr. Mottola. Mrs. Desmond?
Keeping with what Mr. Mottola just said, so it seems like the greatest variability in the cost is the vehicle, not the equipment. In other words, we've seen this big spike in the cost of this vehicle. It's the vehicle itself, not the equipment. I know they're a package, and
See, that's not what this shows,
That's not what
though.
that's not what I'm hearing
That's
either.
what this isn't showing. This shows the equipment. The vehicle itself is like $45,000, and the vast majority of this is all the equipment.
$61,000 worth of equipment on a
Right.
$45,000 vehicle.
right, the Suburban would have been 76, and so this is now. So, any idea about, I mean, what is the rate of inflation on these, on equipment usually? So 5 years ago.
Technology has a higher rate of inflation than some of the more durable pieces of fire equipment. So I wouldn't be able to give you that without a little bit of research.
The technology doesn't move that.
No, technology
rapidly.
is increasing in expense more rapidly than some of the durable equipment.
If we bought this year, if we bought a Suburban for $76,000, and then we just put a lighting package in it, not even the radios in it, that would bring us, let's see, lighting is, vehicle warning and vehicle marking is $14,000 right there. So, I mean, we're rapidly approaching, even with that old standard. So, you know, that just shows you
Thank you.
how we're going.
Okay, so the item is before us, Mr. Becker.
So, I mean, typically I'd be inclined to support the motion. I don't agree. I mean, I've already said this multiple times, and you've been here and your predecessors about bonding. I think the fire truck should be in the budget. I think when you talk about your capital, there should be another line item under it, and it should be setting yourself up with a fund to be able to allow you to purchase on a regular basis, because pretty much every year or every other year you're coming here asking for upwards of $500,000 to even, you know, $750,000 or even $1 million now when you get over ladder truck, and then the command vehicle just sort of fits right in that sort of mold. And yeah, we get a long time on them, but but realistically, we're always chasing the front line apparatus cycle, right?
Right.
And so to that extent, I would much rather see a line item, and that's it. I mean, just moving forward in general. And I know that I've asked for it, and I would hope maybe even after this that maybe, and I've offered sitting here to work with you on it. I mean, but I would like to see some sort of option and what that would look like for us, how we could maybe phase into something like that. But that being said, I know the vehicle, I'm very familiar with it, and I know that it probably should have already been replaced, let alone, I mean, I know it's getting itself going, but it needs to go to reserve and soon. I don't necessarily, in this climate, trust that it's going to show up if we don't do this today in the recommended budget, whether you ask for it or not, and I think that I don't feel comfortable with that, knowing what it needs to be there. I would appreciate, no matter how the motion goes, a copy of like the inventory sheet that built this, some of that background. I think everybody deserves that one way or another here tonight. So if you could do that, and maybe we could set up somewhere as a follow-up. But I do want to. I'd like to see some sort of that proposal on what it would look like to sort of wrinkle this out within the budget so you avoid this. So.
Thank you, David. All right. Anyone else? Seeing none, the amendment is before us. It's to hear, consider, and adopt the bonding resolution entitled Resolution Appropriating. This would change it from 306 to 200,000 for the cost of certain non-recurring capital items and authorizing the issuance of bonds to finance such appropriations. Adjusted as Mr. DeWitt suggested, including taking out item number 1, the fire command truck, from this bonding resolution. All in favor of that amendment? Opposed? 1 opposed, abstentions, no abstains. Okay, so the item as amended is now before us. Gentlemen, to Mr. Walsh's point, I articulated a bunch of different questions I had on this. One, I really would like to see when this comes back before us, and I assume it would be actually what the cost differentials are, how it went up by that much, because I really am having trouble understanding that delta and how it's the same truck we had before. I know it's not the same truck, but how it serves the same function and why the cost went up so much. And if you could help us get there, I'd appreciate it.
I will.
And you definitely have my support for the jacks.
Thank you, sir.
So, Mr. DeWitt.
So 2 points. Being the guy who removed it, I would recommend, maybe to the first selectman, I would support this in your normal operating budget. I don't think this is frivolous, and this is more of a bonding issue to me. And much to the point of Ms. Esma's questions and all, we haven't looked at our bonding resolution since 2011. Maybe $100,000 isn't a good minimum anymore. Maybe it's $200,000. I don't know. So maybe we can consider later in the year, having a bonding committee again and looking at the minimum, because $100,000 is beginning to feel a little low, especially when we're talking about a pickup truck getting there, right?
Thank you, sir.
Even though it's a well-equipped pickup truck, Chief. I get it.
Any other questions, comments, concerns on the item before us?
Just on that, if we could, because we have some newer members, just circulate that document. Sure. I think that'd be helpful.
Yeah. Mr. Mayor, can you
I'm passing it out later tonight.
Thank you. All right. With that, I'm going to call this, does any member of the public have anything to say? Seeing none, I'm going to call this item for a vote as amended. To hear, consider, and adopt a bond resolution entitled A Resolution Appropriating $200,000 for the cost of certain non-recurring capital projects and authorizing the issuance of bonds to finance such appropriation. All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? That item carries. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for a good discussion, and thank you to the fire department for being here. Non-recurring capital, 20 years. To hear, consider, and act upon a bond resolution entitled A Resolution Appropriating $1,640,250 for the cost of certain non-recurring capital projects and authorizing the issuance of bonds to finance such appropriation. That item is now before us. Mr. Mayor, can you show us the list? Where are we heading here?
The list of items in the 20-year bond?
Yeah.
Exhibit 1 in the
Thank you,
document we covered in the beginning. It's got the Fairfield Woods Library elevator, the golf course renovation, the mechanic floor jacks, which
Yep.
have been discussed, the railroad bridge tide gates design, and the data center relocation. So we need DPW, we need Parks and Recs, and we need IT, town IT.
Who was, let's do the library elevator first. Come on up, Mr. Michelangelo. Yeah. Thank you, sir. Can you talk to us a little bit about the elevator?
Sure. The Fairfield Wood Branch Library elevator was the building, as I said in the write-up, was originally constructed late 60s, approximately 1968. When they did a renovation and addition in 1990, they had the foresight to add an elevator, but the elevator they added was very small. The configuration, as I described it, is kind of awkward. You enter like a little alcove vestibule before you go into the elevator. Entrances and exits on different sides between the two floors. So this proposal will put a ADA compliant standard elevator with standard doors that open into the hallway that would be accessible for all patrons, but especially the handicapped to go access the lower level where there's quite a few activities held.
Do we have questions from board members on this item? Mrs. Marmion?
Thank you. So we're currently out of compliance in terms of being ADA compliant?
Correct. It's extremely difficult to navigate. If you see by the pictures, you have to push open doorways. You have to push open at least 2 regular hinge doorways and the sort of accordion cage to get in there. So it's difficult for a able person to use, let alone somebody in a wheelchair.
Could we, have we considered doing the automatic door opener on the side and changing the doors? Would that make it more accessible for people, for example, in a wheelchair?
That would make it more accessible, but it wouldn't serve the total needs to make it accessible. So I think the best way to describe it, if you go through the pictures, and the one that's described lower floor elevator access. So what you're looking at there is a regular hinge doorway, and to use that, somebody will have to get into that, circle around 270 degrees, and you open another doorway to get to the cage that you have to open. So this is a good example of, so instead of looking at this doorway here, hopefully a year from now, you'd look at what you see in the lobby here. Instead of seeing a 3-foot hinge doorway, you'll see a 5-foot wide elevator that has the typical sliding doors that we expect to see there.
Can we get rid of the doors?
Getting rid of the doors will not solve the handicap accessibility area. It's literally, the space is literally too small.
So do we have a turnaround space for electric wheelchair, for example? Do they have enough room to turn around in the space once they get into the space?
No, once again,
Not enough space.
I don't think an athlete could significantly turn around in the space. It's, I described it as awkward, cumbersome, nearly impossible to utilize.
And do we have any idea of the number of people or kids who are prevented from accessing the downstairs because of this? I mean, it sounds like you need an aide to assist you to open the doors, to push you through, to get into the elevator. You can't access it independently, is that correct?
For somebody in a wheelchair, I imagine that the staff has to help, but I'm not aware of of any kind of count of usage or anything like that.
Thank you. Any other questions on this item? Mr. Walsh?
So this goes 3 floors to the basement, middle, up?
Just the 2 floors. There's a basement, a first floor, and there's a mezzanine area for just books.
Yeah.
The mezzanine area is like a half floor. It's not serviced now, and it can't be serviced by this elevator.
I'm having a hard time with amount of dollars. So explain to me why it's costing so much. Is it the actual cart, or do you have to actually widen the shaft?
You have to widen the shaft. So like I said, if you look at this picture here, you're first of all, you have to demo what's
Yep.
there and create a larger shaft to put it. So, and once again, you look at this picture here, at the surface you see the double switches, you see the thermostat there. There's overhead sprinklers. So there's demolition of sheetrock walls and cinder block walls and all the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing involved.
So most of this cost, because it's not really going that far, is the construction cost with widening the shaft and making the whole area larger throughout the middle of this building.
No, I wouldn't say most of it. The car itself is probably, the elevator itself. If we had a perfectly sized shaft and we're just switching the car, that would be over $100,000 just in itself.
Okay. But it's $325, so that's telling me it's about $200,000 of construction costs.
Once again, there's some design costs in there. There's $50,000 contingency because we haven't opened up the wall yet. But we've spoken to elevator contractors, spoken to mechanical engineers on it. So we're as confident as we could be before you do any design work or opening walls.
Ms. Esma.
Joe, so there's obviously material savings on maintenance. Safety jumps out at me in terms of insurance liability. So, if this were to fail, you would have to put this out of service at some point.
Correct, and and not just fail where it doesn't run. The even worse case if somebody's stuck there and.
Have you had any incidents that, involved people being trapped or stuck, or a failure of the
Yeah, over the years there have been, and I think the reason why there probably hasn't been more is it's so inconvenient. I think a lot of people don't use
Avoid
it for
it,
that
yeah.
purpose.
Okay. Well, I do support this. Thank you.
Mr. Leclerc.
I understand and see the need for this, but my concern is, what is the long-term plans for the library?
Thank you. I was
If we
gonna ask.
put this in, will we get the 20-year life out of it?
In my view, the library is a very sound building. We replaced the roof on it probably around 3 years ago. We've invested money in probably about $200,000 in the roof we spent probably 3 or 4 years ago. We did some replacements of the air handler on top. We did some environmental work in the basement. So, the building definitely has, much more life in it. A lot of it, is more of a programmatic, question than a building use itself.
Is there any plans, do we know, to renovate the building on the horizon? I don't remember seeing any of that in the waterfall. Not wholesale. I recall, when I came here, there was a study probably, in the 2008, 2009 range. But once again, the building is as you know, heavily used and, very valuable library, and, no major nightmares with the building itself. So in your estimation, to Mrs. Leclerc's point, bonding this for 20 years, the rest of the building means we'll get 20 years out of the rest of the building, barring some natural disaster.
Correct, yeah, for the 20-year period, definitely.
Mrs. Leclerc, any follow-ups?
Well, that makes me at least feel better, because I guess I was thinking about the same thing. So now that we've done the roof and some of the other work, and if we do this, we're set. We don't have to do anything to that building, really, except cosmetic stuff. We're kind of setting sail with what we're doing with that building.
Correct, yep.
Okay, great.
Thank you. Any other questions on this item? Mrs. Marmon?
It's not really a question, it's more a comment, which is that it's my understanding that Fairfield Woods Library is the busiest branch library in the state of Connecticut. It's a very busy library, meaning that there are a lot of people there, handicapped or not, older people who want to access that floor, and I think we should give them that access, so I will support this.
Thank you. What else? Anybody from the public on this particular item? Mrs. Devanza, welcome.
Helen Devanzo, Jennings Road. I am on board of the Friends of the Library. I'm speaking for myself. I'm also ex officio trustee of the library, go to all the library meetings. Have been very involved in the access issue throughout the town over the years, and have firsthand knowledge of that particular elevator with the grate that goes across. And I'd like to point out that there are potential funding sources available. CDBG funds are available for this. And the state of Connecticut also has, well, who knows this year, but they do have grants available that we can apply for. And it is a requirement under the law that this building be accessible, which it is not. So I support this, and I hope you would too. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Ms. Devanzo actually served on this board. All right, any other comments? Mr. Walsh?
I guess I have a question to bond counsel in regards to the bond that's being written for this. If we are successful in getting a grant, we can reduce the amount of this, correct? Yep, I just wanted to make sure. And could we get a report back in the, say, at the next capital meeting about whether the town was able to find any bonds, ADA bonds or some other type of bonds or grants for this specific project, Mr. First Selectman? If you could look into that and maybe give a report at the next capital meeting.
And Mr. Tetro nodded in the affirmative. Okay. Any other comments on this one? Seeing none, we'll go on to the next one. I'm going to call the fire department back up, and they can talk about their floor jacks for a couple of minutes.
I thought you said to reject this.
Welcome back, gentlemen. Thank you. Hey, you bat 500, you go to the Hall of Fame.
So you can see in the waterfall and description. Sorry, you can see in the in the 14 points in the justification. We are replacing a apparatus lift jack that was manufactured in 1987. We took it from DPW as used equipment in 1994. It has served us very well, but given the weight and complexity of our equipment and the lack of safety features on this piece of equipment, it's time to replace it so that we can safely, effectively lift our equipment and work on it. We send a single mechanic underneath, an 80,000-pound piece of equipment. We want all the safety equipment available to us to protect him and make him as efficient as possible.
Thank you, Chief. Are there questions, comments, concerns from board members on this item? Seeing none, anything from the public? Thank you, gentlemen. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
All right, let's quickly go to the golf course renovation. This, I guess, what year is this of this program? Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you. This should be year 8. We came before you last year, and we ended up putting this one on hold last year. So this is the exact same presentation. 16th green is what we're looking to reshape, rebuild, try to increase pace of play there. It's a very steep grade to the hole right now. So it gives us very limited pin placement. So a lot of wear and tear in the exact same areas. So again, year 8 of our 10-year plan.
Okay, so this is the exact same amount that we've been looking for basically each year?
Yep, exactly.
Okay, and this plus the clubhouse this year, correct?
That's right.
Questions, comments on this? As I've said probably repeatedly, this has been one of the most successful programs we've had. You guys have won awards for the golf course. The town continues to actually make money off the golf course. So, well done.
Thank you.
And you have my support on
Craig
this.
Curley back here did a lot of the work.
I didn't want to say that in public.
You're right.
He knows. Any other questions, comments, concerns from board members on this item? Thank you very much, gentlemen. Appreciate it. Mr. Curley, thank you. All right. We're going to go to number 5, the railroad bridge tide gates design. Hello. Mr. Hurley.
Hello, Brian Carey, Conservation Director, Town of Fairfield.
Thank you, Mr. Carey. Please tell us a little bit about the railroad bridge tide gates. I think we've spoken about this previously, but just refresh our memories.
Yes, so this is similar to a project we're actually doing right now, the grant on Riverside Drive. There's an existing culvert that's part of the that dike system that exists behind Hayden Field. If you walk over the railroad bridge that's back there. It was initially installed in 1980, and then again in 1983 was updated a little bit. We've relined the pipes in 2010, but the bulkhead is actually in failure of collapse. So the plan is to take a little seed money here, do the design, and then basically come back to you once the design is completed for full bonding for the construction phase of the project. It will be permitting intensive, and you know, there'll be significant costs involved with that, but it's something that I've given you in the past as part of the time bond structural estimate of all the tide gates in the town. So right now we're in design for the one that's going to be coming back to you for Riverside Drive. This was going to be following behind that.
Okay.
But it is it is critical infrastructure for our flood control systems. So it needs to be done, and it's not something that can wait much longer.
Thank you. Do we have questions, comments on this item? Mr. DeWitt?
No, just a comment. I'm going to support this. We've heard a lot tide gates about, recently, and maybe in the spring, we just got a tour of the clubhouse, which kind of easy. I wouldn't know a tide gate if I fell over it. So
we can
it
do
would be
that.
it would be good for me to wander around town and figure out where these things are and what they are and what they're doing, because we seem to be spending a lot of money on it, and I feel like I don't know enough to. I defer to your expertise, but it'd be kind of nice to.
Not a problem. We can schedule that.
Appreciate that.
I think it's an excellent idea. We should do it for the whole board at some point in the spring. Pick a nice cold day.
Not a problem.
No. Any other questions, comments from anybody on this? Mrs. LeClaire?
Could you talk about the estimated useful life of them and how that...
So the ones we just installed behind, so most of these have timber bulkheads that are installed currently, and they've lasted between 30 and 40 years. The one we just designed and installed as part of another grant behind the wastewater pollution control plant on Fairfield Beach Road is concrete, and that's like a 50-year time frame.
Thank you very much. Mr. Walsh?
Are there any grants we can get, or is that only during construction, or?
So the last grants that we were getting, all those CDBG DR grants are dried up because they're after Hurricane Sandy. So, I've looked for grants for this. This is not something I would be bringing to you if I could get a grant.
Good to know. Thanks.
Okay, anybody else? Seeing none, public, anybody? Mr. Carey, thank you very much. Let's go to the data center relocation for the IT department for $250,000. Welcome.
Good evening. Dave Kelly, Town IT Director.
Mr. Kelly, welcome. Please walk us through this a little bit.
In my first year here in town, I've developed a rather lengthy to-do list of things that I would like to implement in IT, and a priority item on that list is to develop a disaster recovery business continuity plan for town IT. But a very glaring issue, a glaring concern I have, is the condition of the town's 2 production data centers. These are the data centers that the town employees and public safety use day to day and day out. When I arrived in town, there was a project underway to move the backups data center out of the basement of the Fairfield Woods branch library to a co-location facility in Trumbull, Connecticut. Unfortunately, our 2 remaining data centers are in basements of buildings in town, within 1 mile of the shore, and it's never been a good practice to have any data center in the basement of a building. Any kind of a water event can cause a problem. perhaps wipe out your equipment. And I think that we need to basically get our data centers out of basements to a safer, higher elevation. When I went around town meeting department heads and early on, I was not bashful about asking, hey, do you have a place where you could perhaps accept a couple of racks worth of equipment for to create a small data center? And I met with Lieutenant Buccarati in the police department, and he showed me a couple of locations that he thought might work out. And we looked at them, and the room as it is not sufficient as a data center. But by moving a few walls around, we could make a space be a small data center. He then dragged me down the hall and around the corner to meet Chief McNamara to ask him if he would approve of reorganizing the space. I think he's here tonight. I hope he remembers. He said yes. He was very willing.
Shaking his head no.
No, he doesn't remember. So anyway, we have a space that is substantially better than where our data servers are located now, that I think will be more resilient to an outage or a storm or an emergency. And even if the worst happens and we lose access to the equipment during the emergency, at least the equipment wouldn't be permanently damaged.
So I'm going to ask kind of the question that's like the elephant in the room. In 2017, why are we building data centers as opposed to throwing this up on the cloud or taking advantage of other technologies that aren't?
We are
using
doing a
data center?
combination of all of those things.
Okay.
Roughly half of the town's technology is in the cloud,
Okay.
or hosted with a vendor as a software as a service. Many of our systems are half and half, where maybe the data resides in town, but then we kick a copy out to a vendor. An example is the town GIS maps.
Right.
The town maintains the town GIS maps, but we send a copy to a cloud provider that then presents those maps to the public through a
And
website.
why aren't we moving as quickly as possible? Are we moving as quickly as possible
Well,
to that?
in some cases, it's not possible. Many of the town applications, many of the public safety applications, the vendors simply don't support a cloud model.
Really?
Yeah, it's still the case that many of them just simply don't do it. In some cases, it's just it's more expensive actually to go to the cloud than to operate locally. In this case, I'm not looking to build more data center. I'm actually looking to consolidate and shrink data centers. We currently have 2 data centers, one that serves most of the town administrative systems and another that's primarily police and fire. I'm not sure, new to town, I'm not sure how we ended up with 2 such data centers. It's probably an accident of history from 20 or 30 years ago. But the town data center is a large, professionally designed 800 square foot data center built when Independence Hall was built. However, due to going to the cloud and miniaturization over time, our needs are for just one equipment rack for the town servers. By equipment rack, I'm talking something the size of a large Maytag refrigerator.
Right.
So 30, 40 years ago, when a 100 megabyte disk drive for your computer system was the size of a washing machine, that's just not the case anymore. So town IT's data center is, the definition of a data center to me now is 1 rack's worth of equipment.
And that's what you want to build, is a couple of racks worth of
I'm
equipment.
just looking to put 2 equipment racks.
And you're getting them out of a
basements.
floodplain and out of basements.
Well, the
not
primary
quite.
site is the police department, which is at the edge of the 100-year
Right.
floodplain. But the police department, the building is elevated somewhat, and I'm going to the 2nd floor of a building.
And you're racing as quickly as you can to the cloud, with the exception of programs and
There are
software
some
that
things
won't
that
let you.
just aren't available as such right now.
Okay. Anyone, questions, comments on this item? We'll go to Mr. Mottola and then Mr. Walsh.
I thought I read here somewhere that you were looking at the fire department too as a possible site?
As there is also a small data center existing in the fire department's 2nd floor. The room is a bit too small as is to support to fit the racks, the full-size equipment racks.
I think the chief will rent it to you for about $106,000.
There's a thought, yeah. Yes. For a number of reasons, the police department location is a slightly better location, but if for some reason we get engineers in, they look at it and say, hey, the floor can't support it, or there's some reason why it can't support a data center, then I'll go see Chief McCarthy and ask if I can't move a wall a couple of feet over to make the existing space in the fire station more suitable.
And there's generator backup power at the police
Yes.
station to support this in case power goes out? Okay. All right, thank you.
Mr. Walsh?
I think it makes total sense. I mean, the fact that it already has a generator there that you don't have to reinvest in or buy another generator to support it. Also, I believe the police department is on the new grid. Is that where we get priority electricity?
Microgrid.
Microgrid?
Well, the police department, the fire station, and Operation Hope
DPW.
are all part of a microgrid.
Yeah.
Which I believe, I'm not an expert in this area, but I believe the idea is that it reduces the load on the grid by supplementing with solar and stuff like that. However, they are also all tied together on a backup generator.
Yes.
But the two aren't related. As I understand it, the microgrid doesn't operate if there's a power outage.
Okay.
The generator does. It's kind of an either-or, as I understand it.
And they're not charging you rent for this space?
Well, Chief McNamara and I haven't gone through
Well,
those
hopefully
details.
we'll-
But
so this is, seems-
there is a piece in the project that supports a concern that the police have with their wiring infrastructure on the second floor of the building. So part of this project would be to solve Chief McNamara's problem as well as the town's data center problem.
Sounds like a win-win to me. That's great. And you will still keep the backup center that's off-site in Trumbull?
Yes.
Okay. So we will no longer then have, after this is completed, any emergency backup stuff in the basements of buildings that are below flood zones and will be exposed,
That's my
potentially
dream.
exposed to water. I think it's been all our dreams for a while, so I think that's great.
Mrs. Esmond?
So I noticed that if it were to be, if the police department were to be the chosen location, there's a dual benefit. So if for any reason they don't meet the requirements, is moving that network closet also a priority item?
Yes. Even if we can't do the data center,
Mm-hmm.
then maybe we don't rebuild the room because the room as is could accommodate the network
The network,
rewiring and the network equipment. In my previous life, I've run into this. When buildings were built back in the 1970s, nobody ever thought about spaces for network switches and hubs and powered equipment and stuff like that. So you go to your facilities department and say, hey, where can I jam one in? Probably 20 years ago, they said, here, you can put it in this HVAC air handling room. Well, it turns out there's an air conditioning thing above it that drips in the summer. So, it's, IT ends up getting tucked off and into non-ideal spaces.
I've seen that.
So I think it would be a good idea to relocate their network hub for the second floor of the police department to a safer location as well.
Okay, great. And when we talk about generator backup, is this a true UPS system?
The police department does have some UPS equipment that keeps things like the ECC alive. If the power goes out,
Right, there's
their
no interruption.
computers and radios and things continue to run until the generator comes up and takes over. I don't think I'm not sure that the entire building benefits from that immediate battery backup. But in the data racks, we would install a small UPS unit that would just carry the servers over for that 10 or 15 seconds that it takes for a generator to spin up and come online.
Okay, great, thank you.
Any other questions on this item? Anybody from the public? Seeing none, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
All right, we'll go to the Board of Education. We have the security infrastructure upgrades, and then we have the student parking lot replacement, of which we've seen some pictures and things like that. Welcome back, everybody. Thank you. Quick question. Security infrastructure upgrades. It seems like we've been doing this year after year after year. Are we in the last year finally? When are we on this? Because this
Yes.
has been a multi-year. You didn't extend this a year without asking us, did you, Tom?
No, and I did want to bring up, because at the summit, you asked for some detail about the security infrastructure,
Yeah.
where we were, and we did answer those questions and give you a spreadsheet.
Yes.
And I wanted to start out by saying the security infrastructure project we're requesting tonight is in another phase. There are 3 phases to the security infrastructure that we did at all the public schools. This is in reference to funding the completion of Phase 1 and Phase 2 to do with the intrusion panels. The original intent, as we worked with the police department, was to do a ballistic glazing. Through our investigations with them and all the work we did, it turned into intrusion panels. So it's a little bit more money that we didn't expect. We've been bidding out all the schools, getting them done, and this amount we're asking for is to complete that. So then all 3 phases will be done.
So no more next year. We won't be looking at any, everything else will be routine, ongoing. This isn't part of the first
It'll be
overall.
mostly maintenance, which we can handle with our operating budget, security account, if that stays funded, and unless the police department or something happens in the future that we want to add.
Hey, Chief McNamara, any thoughts on this before we go on? Just because we've been following this program for a number of years now, I just want to make sure.
Yeah, I think Tom summarized it very well, is that this is really the completion of the ask that we did several years ago. And that adjustment was made because of the circumstances surrounding school safety and security. There'll always be a need for upgrading and making sure that, some minor adjustments that are made throughout the year that cost no money whatsoever. So each year, there'll probably be some funding, which the school, the Board of Ed usually request a certain line item of funding. But I believe that anything that would be significant, meaning that would alter and change dynamically any part of the school security, would we do due diligence and come before all the boards like we've done in the past to get the understanding and the funding. So I don't anticipate any further funding without coming back for a significant request. And then that would give everybody an opportunity to vet that properly.
Right, and there's nothing on the horizon in that score right now.
No.
Okay. Thank you, Chief. Does anybody have any questions on this ongoing program for the town? All right. Seeing none, we'll go to item number 2, which is the student parking lot replacement. This is at Fairfield Ludlow, right?
Yes.
So go right ahead.
So the next project is in your booklet. It starts on page 13. And this is for the repaving of the student parking lot in the back of Fairfield Ludlow High School. This project won't be just to pave over what's existing. What we want to do is go in and reclaim the existing bituminous, fix the subgrade. We want to add what's called speed tables that are working much better than speed bumps at the schools, and then repave, restripe, reline, renumber. We expect that we will get 12 or 13 years out of that.
Question, Mr. DeWitt.
Thank you again, Mr. Cullen. On page 14, other considerations. So this work will be assigned to a state-approved contracted paving contractor with the help from Public Works. I'm looking at our bonding policy, and we don't specifically say we won't bond paving, even though for Public Works we no longer bond paving, right? We do say that we won't do road repair, but I think this is a little more than road repair. But I'm still, even though it doesn't specifically say it in here, I'm still kind of struggling with this being a bonded item.
Well,
and believe me, I've been to the high school. I think it's warranted, but I'm struggling with why this is a bonded.
It's a legitimate question. Our Board of Ed operating budget has a line for paving, sidewalks, and curbs.
Mm-hmm.
It's generally been funded for my time here around $100,000. It's about $150 now.
Right.
It is not a lot. to do 17 school locations. We normally try and do chunks and pieces for 40,000, 60,000 roughly, and we try and get 3 or 4 schools done. This was a much bigger area, and you can see the dollar amount. We wouldn't be able to fund that in our operating budget.
Yeah. Is this just the main parking lot in the front, or are we talking about paving around the ball field and the whole thing?
It's the whole back, the student parking lot under the solar carports that were just put in.
Oh, okay.
And it includes 2 speed tables.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Matola?
What's a speed table?
Speed table is something new we're working with DPW on. A speed bump is simply a quick bump, but most of the students and people can drive right over those without even slowing down. A speed table is a ramp that goes 6 feet on an incline of 8 inches, 5 feet wide, and then 6 feet back down. So you literally have to slow down to go up over it and back over. We normally put them where there's crosswalks, so there's big lines on them, signage all around them, and we tried them out at Ward High School in the back, and they are working great. Yeah, and the plow companies don't destroy them as much as they do the speed table,
Mr.
the
Cullen,
speed
that's-
bumps.
I wanted to touch on that. That's one of my biggest frustrations, is we'll see a lot of very nice paving work done at any number of our schools. And then one winter, when when the spring thaw comes, you're seeing those curbs absolutely destroyed. And I don't know how we manage our plow companies or what their responsibility is.
They are fully responsible.
Okay, so when are they going to get out there and fix it? Because
So-
I see many schools where they're not fixed at.
We had our previous contractor gave us a little bit of trouble with the concrete curbing he destroyed, but all the bituminous curbing he did replace. A couple of light poles, PTA bench, some signage.
What about Jennings School? I think there's
Our
curbs all over the place.
newest contractor now owns all of it. We made sure the language was clearer, stricter. We worked with DPW and bid that out.
So are they going to fix the curbs that are already destroyed?
Yes.
When's that going to happen?
That usually happens when spring comes and they know winter's over, there's no more snow, they're pulling the stakes up.
Okay, so I want to see you in July when they come back
Okay.
and see this. Because really, I
Specifically
mean,
Jennings.
it's really grotesque. I mean, we see them spend a ton of money to do these paving projects,
It
and then
is.
literally a winter afterwards, the concrete curbs are up on the snow banks. I mean, I don't know what these guys are doing when they're plowing, but it's absolutely terrible.
They don't actually feel anything. The equipment is so large, that's what they tell us. They're hitting things and they don't
I'm
even
going to use
feel
that
it.
next time I hit something. Chief,
But-
is that going to work when I hit it? My car's just too big. I really didn't see him. Yeah.
But we,
Can we give them tickets for hitting our curbs? They don't know.
because we've asked them too, we said, how are you destroying so much stuff? They said they don't even feel it. So they've got to put good markers out. It's on them. The onus is on them to mark islands, mark where signage is. And the new contract we have, he's already repairing a couple of lights he knocked down, so he's jumping right on it.
Okay. And then Mrs. Leclerc noticed something in your write-up that I want to bring to your attention because it's concerning. Go ahead, Mrs. Leclerc.
So, on page 13, it says that, the repaving project is expected to last at least 10 years. But, we have it listed under the 20-year bonding. So I wanted you to explain that a little bit, and whether it should be 20-year, or should we be moving this into 10?
No, the new paving project should last us 10 to 12 years, but at that point, we can pave over what's there, where we can't now. Normally, we try and go in and try and do one paving over once we know the sub-base is down properly, they've used the right tonnage to pack it down, and we can get longer life out of it. The Ludlow parking lot's already been paved over 2 or 3 times, and it's just crumbling constantly.
Is
So
that the
I
same reason you're moving it into bonding, because this is the base of it?
Right, we're gonna go right down to the sub-base, fix the sub-base drainage, and then repave. So we're not going over the top of it. So we should get a longer life out of it.
And how come it continues to crumble like that? Did we not, when we opened the high school, go all the way down?
No, we didn't pave it when we did the renovation and addition, and also that was the staging area for all the contractors to set up and be fenced in. So a lot of big equipment was moving around there. We also wanted to start and try and get rid of some of the exterior lighting that was sitting in the parking lot. A lot of the renovations we did at some of the schools, they didn't put the lighting in islands and on the perimeter. They put them in where the cars were, and they're getting hit and knocked down. So we tried to expand those out, put junction box under there. So we did a lot of repairs to get it where we want it, and now it's ready to be repaved.
Anybody else? Ms. Esma?
How many drains are in this area to be paved?
Sewer drains. Probably not a lot because it's pitched to go all the way down to the exit area by Sturgis Field, and there's one down there.
And all the drains are, in good shape. They don't need any
Yes.
additional repairs.
Yes.
Okay.
The only thing we'd have to watch is, it's a good question because we have to watch where we put the speed tables. The speed tables are so large, they have to have an angled swale on them, so the water goes away from them to the sides instead of over them.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, any members of the public want to speak to this item? And that's it. Thank you, everybody.
Can I make a request for next year? This book, can we get this earlier than tonight? I know you gave us the materials electronically, but it's a
The
nice
hard
book.
copy?
It's
Yeah,
just-
hard copy.
If we're going to get it tonight, we might as well. I know it's prepared probably a month before this, right?
Yeah, yes,
so if
it
you could
is.
just mail it to us or something, that'd be great. I'd like to read it. So it's a nice book.
Be happy to.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
All right. So I'm going to call this for a vote now. To hear, consider, and adopt a bond resolution entitled a resolution appropriating $1,640,250 for the cost of certain non-recurring capital projects and authorizing the issuance of bonds to finance such appropriation. All good? All in favor of this item? Opposed? Abstention? That item carries. Thank you. I'm going to call for a 5-minute recess before we go to item number 6, which is to the police chief. So let's take a brief recess. Thank you, everybody. We're going to bring this back to the board. Jerry, are we up? We're good. Okay. Item number 6, to hear, consider, and act upon a request from the police chief to transfer $31,000 from the contingency account to ECC fees and professional services account to hire a consultant to evaluate the ECC consolidation project. Before I turn it over to the chiefs, I want to ask Mr. Mayor, what's the status of the contingency account?
I don't think we spent anything out of it this year.
So how much do we have available?
595,000.
595,000, nothing spent so far to date.
Correct.
Okay. Chief, go right ahead.
So just kind of, and you may have some questions about process, but I'm sure you're all aware, and if you're not, just as a quick little overview, our 911 center, which is really a consolidated center that we've done many years ago, the town of Fairfield consolidated between fire and police and put that 911 center in the police department. It currently sits in the basement of the police department. So our center is consolidated. And we have been preparing and planning over the last several years, recognizing that it is not in the ideal location. Number one, it is apparently on the border of the 100-year flood, as we've kind of recently determined, and so that's not necessarily a good thing. Some of the concerns about all that equipment being in the basement, if it were to flood, there's concerns whether or not insurance would cover all that equipment. And in addition to that, we need to upgrade some of the equipment in general. It's kind of end-of-life equipment. So over the last several years, we've been looking at and preparing for options of where to move our center, our Consolidated Fire and Police Fairfield Center. And there's been several different options that have been floated. In the process of really moving that forward, and we've been before you before to indicate that there is some money, at least in the waterfall, in anticipation for that move. We've also had discussion with the town of Westport. And the town of Westport is in the same boat that we were in many, many years ago, meaning they have separate dispatch. They have fire that dispatch separately, and police that dispatch separately. They're in the process of doing two things. One, combining, as the town of Fairfield did many years ago, and then at the same time looking for a location to do that. In our discussions between the fire chief and Chief McCarthy here in Fairfield, the Westport chief, myself, and Chief Koskinas from Westport, as well as the first selectman from both communities, we collectively looked at this being an opportunity to consolidate and really regionalize emergency dispatch. So that is in process of discussion and furthering moving that forward.
Chief, is this 31,000, would Westport be spending a similar amount of money on this?
Yeah, so I just wanted to give you that overview for those of you who may not have been aware of it. So now the discussions are ongoing, but it takes a lot of work to consolidate and to regionalize such a big project. So we've been having ongoing meetings that are going on weekly between all the interested parties who are discussing several timeline events that need to be hit, that have no financial impact, but certainly we need to hit certain thresholds at a certain time. One of the most significant things to ensure that this project moves forward appropriately is to get somebody that really knows what they're doing, meaning knows how to take two different towns that dispatch differently, although the same, but there are uniquenesses in each town. The populations are different, and can come in and analyze both of our communities and then say, how do you make that dispatch center one? How is it managed? How is it operated? How is it funded? So what we're doing before you today is asking for our share of the money to fund a consultant to do that. So Westport put out an RFP about a month ago, looking for consultants, looking for people that have expertise in that. We got 7 back. Again, under Westport's RFP, we got 7 consultants back. We narrowed it down to 3, and then the committees from each community narrowed those 3 down to the most appropriate one. And the one that we've determined is a little under $80,000 for the cost. And that they will come in here. They've done it. They've been vetted. They're professional at what they've done. This is not the first time they've done that. So a little under $80,000. We've agreed to pay half of that, and Westport will pay the other half. So our share, the town of Fairfield's share, would be a little under $40,000. We looked in our operating budget, the ECC operating budget for the current year that we have now, and Captain Smith, who unfortunately wasn't able to be here, he had surgery on his knee, but is watching, actually, so was able to find $8,000 or a little over $8,000 in his operating budget for the ECC from our capital line item. When he came up with that budget for this year, we buy computers for our cars and modems for our cars. What we've determined, we're able to buy the computers and the modems together, so we don't have the added expense for the modem. So we can take that savings of a little over $8,000, and then if we get the contingency transfer to professional fees and professional services in that ECC of $31,000, that will make up the money that the town of Fairfield would have to put forth for the consultant.
Thank you, Chief. We have questions. Mrs. Marmon.
Thank you. So are we limited by, say the consultant comes back and says, forget Westport, let's go with Bridgeport, or let's go Westport, Bridgeport, Trumbull. Are they going to look at all sorts of consolidation opportunities, or just the opportunity with Westport?
Yeah, so our committee, or our groups, made up of fire and police from both towns. First of all, what we did was we looked whether or not we could do that. Obviously, Bridgeport is a whole different 911 center, so the ability for us to mesh with them would be very difficult and extremely difficult. When you look at Westport, Westport's smaller and their call volume's different. However, we're kind of equal in the way in which we dispatch. So the consultant is not going to come back and say, well, I shouldn't say that. The consultant could come back and say it's not a good idea, and then hopefully they would, and then that's money well spent, and give the reasons why. We're not asking them to find us a partner. Our partner, we believe our best partner in the regionalization, which will probably be the first in the state of Connecticut, and everybody talks about the benefits of regionalization. We're saying to this consultant, we want to combine with Westport and Fairfield. So give us an analytical review of how we do that.
Okay, I understand that. So you've already done some analysis, obviously, in
Yes.
terms of looking at the towns that would be good partners. The analysis that the consultant would do, what are the components of that? Are they looking at the cost savings? Are they looking at the cost of the consolidation? Are they looking at, how to dedicate resources, resources where there's overlap? What are the different components of the analysis that the consultant will be doing?
So some of the things that we're asking the consultant to do is to administratively, in other words, how do we manage a combined dispatch center? We have dispatchers that we pay for in the town of Fairfield, and Westport has their own dispatchers. Who has control of that? Is it a better operation that one town controls it and the other town pays into it? Or is it better that we get a quasi-governmental organization that both towns pay into and is operated by? That's one thing. In addition to that, they'll analyze call volume, so they'll be able to tell us how much staffing we would need, how much training would be needed to combine, to get all the dispatchers up and running. And I don't know whether there's any other list of...
There's definitely a request in the RFP to provide a cost analysis. We have just ballparked this thing, but the consultant would be required to really look at facility, look at long-term staffing needs, and what that equates to on a cost basis also. There is some technology aspects to it, some component dealing with our radio system and how to best utilize the RF with both communities.
So it's essentially a roadmap for how you would do this. And you mentioned facilities, so they'll be analyzing available space or where to place this center, correct?
Correct.
No decisions have been made already, or you have options out there that you are going to have the consultant consider and give you feedback on?
So we have been working with Sacred Heart University and have been under the assumption, or not even under the assumption, but have been working with them on space on the GE campus. That space is former space that GE used for a similar operation, so it's almost plug and play, so that lowers the cost. And while it's not finalized, that's the direction that we're moving in. It's a location that we believe would be well suited for a combined dispatch center with Westport. So while the consultant would look at that and say whether or not that might be a bad idea, we're kind of looking at that as being the location for this center. Now keep in mind that's one component. 911 centers are very regulated by the state of Connecticut, so there's a lot of requirements that the state requires to bless a 911 center. So we can't, we would have to follow those, whether or not it has access, whether it has backup generators, the construction, how it's constructed, who has access. There's a lot of things that the state needs to do that we would have to meet, that we already know, that the consultant doesn't have to tell us those things, we already know those, but we'll combine with those discussions with the consultant to come up with the best, good point, roadmap moving forward. We can do only so much, but we really need somebody to come in here and say, this is the roadmap to success, because it's going to be a huge investment on both towns' parts to combine a dispatch center and move the dispatch centers to one single location.
Thank you. We'll go with Mrs. LeClaire and then Ms. Esmond.
So do you anticipate that we'll have an improved service when you combine them, or is it just a cost-saving measure, or?
So I think that the service level will remain the same, which I think is really great, or get better. And why I mean get better is that law enforcement and fire service, oftentimes with Westport, maybe more on the fire side, when an incident happens, we're already trying to communicate and to facilitate working better together. So to have them all working in the same room allows for quicker communication, and not necessarily whether or not a Fairfield police car can get to a location on the high end of Fairfield when there might be a Westport police car that's 2 blocks away that's in Westport. Now certainly that goes into operations and policies and procedure and how we work there, but I think any time, regionalization is certainly areas that the state and other communities are looking to save money and to become better. anytime in a public safety realm that you can get people to communicate and work better together, I think you're going to see an improved service. I think that combining that dispatch center, we'll see gradually that our service will improve.
Ms. Esma.
Chief, did you say that there's no other, nowhere else in Connecticut that there's a combined call center like this?
So there are there's some regional combined dispatch centers up in the Litchfield County area that generally focus on, and they're private, it's a private company that runs that. So their model is that a private company runs it and communities pay into that and pay a yearly fee for that. But they are generally smaller communities, and I think a lot of them deal with fire service, more on the volunteer fire service. I know that we've just had indications that the Waterbury Police Department, I think, has moved towards consolidating maybe with that one entity, but I think that we would be one of the first, I believe the first, but one of the first to take two communities, fire and police, and combine them together to get that better service, but ultimately to save costs.
Yeah,
There's a lot of duplication.
Absolutely. I'm in favor of this idea. Where's the nearest example in terms of area served, number of calls? I mean, is there anything within, New York State, Massachusetts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I don't know what the closest one is, but I think that the state of Connecticut is really behind the times when it comes to consolidating. If you look at, not so close, but California, I mean, California's a big state, and I don't know, I think they probably have 4.
5.
Yeah, I think
The state of California has 5 public safety answering points, where in Connecticut, we have about 100 at this point.
So would this serve almost like a permanent mutual aid system?
Well, it would in all likelihood improve mutual aid. Mutual aid is separate, and so if we look for mutual aid, we get on our radios, talk from the police perspective, and say we need more officers from other towns to come in. By having a combined dispatch center, oftentimes that communication can be quicker.
Yeah.
And I believe this roadmap will allow us also to expand to see whether or not there are other communities that may want to come on board with that. So they are duplicating services. So there is that potential to make it that it would become a little larger if other communities see the success in it and want to join forces to come on board with us.
Great. Well, thank you for your work on this. I'm very much in favor.
Anybody else? Mr. Walsh.
I understand that. I mean, I'm in favor of this amount of money, but at some point we're going to have to come into a broader agreement about the total cost to set up the center, correct? Would the risk at that point potentially be that the state could come down and say, no, we're going to, by statute, set up a regional center, we're going to have it be downtown Bridgeport, and you have to join? And then the money that we would put into a new Sacred Heart center might be wasted down the line. But I guess we have some time to figure out whether that even happens. But would that be a potential risk to us establishing ours with Westport, is that there could be legislation, since there's been attempts at it before, that another, we go to 5 regionals for the whole state, and the state sets that up and says where it's going to be, and we have to join it, and that any money that we put into this Sacred Heart Center could potentially be at risk later on.
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, I know there's been a lot of dialogue at the state level to try and get combined answering services or answering centers. The populations have always been lower than the town of Fairfield, so we wouldn't generally be affected by that. They can't even get that passed, so the likelihood that they would go even larger.
Yeah.
We've had discussions with the state on this preliminary. Again, this is all moving in different tangents. We've had discussions preliminary with the state. The state has come down and looked at the location that could potentially be the location that we're going to be in. They like the location. Again, they have to approve it. And they like the concept of combining in regionalization. It helps support them. If two communities can do that, it helps support their arguments to move forward. Discussing funding, if we combine, we believe that there will be significant savings in the area of what it would cost to construct it. The town of Fairfield 911 Center has to be moved out of the basement.
Yes.
And we would spend that money to do that.
Sure.
By combining centers, there's more money coming from the state to do that. Plus the fact that now you have Westport that was going to spend their sum of money, now that money comes into it. So I think our overall expenses to do the center are going to be lower than doing it alone. Number one, from Westport kicking in, as well as the state. And then in addition to that, by having that center, we believe, in preliminary discussions with the state, that our funding, we receive funding every year from the state to run our center. We believe that having a combined center is going to increase our amount of funding, therefore hopefully lowering the yearly operating costs long-term of what we'd be responsible for.
The center that you've seen at Sacred Heart, if that were to come to reality, does that have additional capacity to add on other towns, or is it only going to big enough for a Fairfield Westport situation?
Yeah, no, it has the capacity.
Capacity to potentially add other communities on as you went along.
Yeah, it has the capacity to add a few more communities. Whether or not the consultant would say it has 2 or 3 or 4, that would be something we talk about.
Sure.
But we've already, and again, just in discussions,
Sure.
we've already had other communities reach out and just say, hey, you know, we would be interested if this were to come true. Now, again, that's either at a police level or at a fire level. That's not at the town level, or that I'm aware of. But you've already started to see that interest of, hey, you know, if this really were to come in, we really like to come in and do this with you. Some of the smaller communities that surround our areas are certainly going to be interested.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on this item? Mr. Becker?
You know, and you just touched on it about the fact that we were going to have to do something anyways, and that there was a fair amount of money that had been sitting in the waterfall to do that. I mean, sitting there, similar to tonight, where we're finally getting things out of the basement. You know, this is an outdated center sitting right in the basement in a flood zone. So I think it's good, and I think if we can get additional dollars, it's great. I mean, I think that really that I know that public safety for a very long time, primarily through mutual aid, but also a lot of the regional initiatives and funding has been a model for what everyone else sort of wants to do with this regionalization and trying to drive down costs and create more benefit. So I'm entirely in favor of this, and I'm certainly going to support doing the transfer and look forward to kind of seeing the next steps on this as it comes to us and hopefully comes to fruition. And I think you're right, there are a number of other smaller, potentially bordering or nearby communities that have clearly are going to have interest in this, and I think that's only going to ultimately make this better, no matter where it actually starts. I think in the end we're going to find ourselves the leader in this category. So I'm really excited to be able to support this tonight.
And keep in mind, this is our share of this portion of it is a little under $40,000. If the consultant came back and said no, as I said before, it's really money well spent. I mean, this is such a big project that we want to make sure that we have the support and the roadmap, as you said, to really move it forward appropriately, rather than just say that we can do it on our own. We cannot do a project like this on our own. In order for it to be successful, we need the help of somebody who's done it before.
Thank you. Anybody else? Seeing none, any members of the public wish to say anything? Seeing none, I'm going to bring it to a vote. To hear, consider, and act upon a request from the police chief to transfer $31,000 from the contingency account to ECC fees and professional services account to hire a consultant to evaluate the ECC consolidation project. All in favor of this item? Opposed? Abstentions? That item carries. Thank you, gentlemen. Good luck with the project. We look forward to hearing for an update in the future. That concludes the voting portion of our agenda this evening. We have 3 items left. The first item is to review the fiscal year budget meeting calendar by department and discuss the fiscal year 2020 budget process. Now, this is to review and to discuss. The meeting calendar, we set the meeting schedule a couple months back. What we didn't set, and what we never vote on but always talk about, is the department schedule, when we're going to hear the departments. We also have a budget subcommittee that has met now for several years after the prior year's budget process. And this year, in fact, we got a little bit of a late start on that. But to review and decide what we could do better. Now, this has always been good because we've improved the budget process dramatically through the year, and I'll give Mr. Mayor credit, I'll give Mr. Tetral credit. and the finance team credit, the level of information we've gotten has gotten much better through the years. We've incorporated ideas that came from this board, ideas that came from the finance department year after year, and improved our process. We've also, we've been much more efficient in our process of what departments we spend time on, and that can vary from year to year depending on what's going on. But overall, year after year, we've made improvements. This year, at the end of last year, at the end of the budget process, a few things I heard anecdotally from a bunch of members, Republicans and Democrats, was, God, the number of meeting nights is killing us. And we actually, I think I didn't go back and do the math, but I think our attendance kind of slipped in our meeting nights last year with people having other obligations. We also thought that we needed some of the information that we used to have some things such as OPEB, pension, retiree benefits. We had them earlier in the process, and as you'll recall, a lot of those nights were spent discussing the latest estimates, but saying by the time we get to vote, we're going to have new numbers, right? So we ended up rehashing things that we had discussed earlier in the process. So could we address the number of nights? Could we address the fact that we needed, with some more time, there'd be some better information available? And the third item that came up sporadically, and this comes up year after year, is the distance between when the Board of Selectmen votes and when we vote. Because the Board of Selectmen typically votes, and then within 48 hours, we're voting. Now, they may or may not substantially change the budget by the time we vote on it. So we're hearing a budget that's not voted on by the Board of Selectmen. Then it comes, we go all the way through with our colleagues on the Board of Selectmen, hear it, and then they get to vote on it and change it, and then we have to adapt to whatever that changed budget is. And there was a certain amount of comments and frustration on that. So what do we do about that? So obviously, the biggest thing is actually giving us more time between when the Board of Selectmen votes and, if needed, when the Board of Finance votes, so that we have more time to follow up on whatever they did and understand it a little bit better. It's buying for time in that, okay? So those were the real three objectives. What was interesting was when the Budget Committee went and did their work, which were Chris and Jim at that point, because that's who had been appointed to it in prior year, what they found out was that we weren't necessarily following the charter in the budget process. And that gets into the second part of the discussion as to just to lay out for 2020 budget process, okay, so the budget process for next year, we need to make sure we understand what we want to do, how we want to play it, is it in compliance with the charter, and move it. We all agree that it's way too far down the path to do that this year, but it's something that we're going to need to discuss sooner rather than later. And I think Chris's presentation tonight, and again, Jim Brown sends his regrets, lays out, here's 2019 and some ideas, and here's, or rather, 2018, and here's for the budget process for 2019, some of the excerpts of the charter and what it all means. So with that long preamble, I'm going to turn it over to Chris to go through kind of some of the things that they've discussed. So thank you, Chris.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's copies of this on the end by Deb for the crowd, AKA Mike. So I'll take you through. I've left a copy on everyone's in front of everyone's chair. Take you right to the first page. So the chairman did a good introduction here. We were tasked, the budget committee, were tasked by the chairman to review the budget process. So three major things happened. So I took on the task to do what I call the ultra-condensed budget process. I literally said, you know, if we started at noon on Friday, could we literally plow through this in a weekend? I mean, spending all day Saturday, all day Sunday. Well, it was feasible. It does seem as if it was feasible. But doing in that in abbreviated form, we would have to eliminate some budgets that we normally wouldn't normally spend a lot of time on, and that wasn't really what a lot of people wanted to do. And again, it would we would really have to hold our time to each budget to a very concise amount of time. So I proved the fact that we could do this ultra condensed process, and then mid-December I met with the first selectman to discuss what we had done, this process and other ideas. And he did speak a lot about what the chairman spoke about, which is, rather than trying to move things earlier, right, we should think about what we should move later, because again, OPEB and retiree, we always sit here and go, hey, great data, thanks for it, in 3 weeks we'll see the next round.
No,
Insurance, we always, right.
insurance, yes, but OPEB and retirement, we know what they are when they come here. They usually come to the first meeting.
Okay, so the insurance, right.
Healthcare, we go month by month.
Right. So, fast forward to January, right? I created an abbreviated schedule, and that was going to serve two purposes. One, it's going to create a little more flexibility for us, and create more time before the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance vote. And I'll step you through that. But the bottom line is, I removed, two days out of the formal budget process. And again, I'll step you through that. And then last thing is, as the chairman said, we were also asked to assess the budget process against the charter. So the next chart, this is what we would work to in less than a month. All of the dates you see here are currently on the budget calendar. Now, the order of when we're going to have them and who's going to present on one night have been rearranged, and some of the departments have been combined. The biggest change probably is on our first night. I put all of administrative and general together. So what does that mean? That's the Shellfish Commission. That's the, I got it right here. FairTV, right, not-for-profit, probate court, a lot of the things that we traditionally don't spend a lot of time on. Now, the one thing that could really help make this night a little bit as short as possible, if we get the budget book in enough time, we could decide as a board to do a quick review, and if we have any 0% raises or 0% changes in any of these, we could, as a board, just say, listen, you know what? You 5 departments that haven't changed your budget in the last year, don't bother showing up. We're just going to pass it through. We could do that. Or our first night could be a little bit long, and we could plow through every budget process. Keeping in mind that if we can limit our discussion and what we talk about, I don't think it's really that big a deal. So you'll see that.
And by the way,
Yeah.
Chris,
Yes.
from what you presented to me, that's the biggest change that there is.
That is really
one night.
That is really the biggest change. So I did eliminate 2 nights, but the rest of the nights really have not changed in what I would consider duration of budgets we've done in the past before. So, and I have the painful detail of this, which I can supply tomorrow, but you'll see, for the sake of discussion, number 1 through 5 is our budget process with the Board of Selectmen. The 19th to 21st were hearing evenings. We don't need those, so we're just keeping them on the schedule as potential makeups for snow days, or if we need more information. The 22nd was going to be our initial discussion about we have one night where we have public session where the public, it's an open session, but the public doesn't get to discuss. We just discuss in an open forum without public comment. The hope was that, and then the 24th is our Saturday session. So the hope with creating those 3 days was that the Board of Selectmen, who's discussing on the 26th and voting on the 27th, could move their meeting up or back, if you will, to 21st that week, give us more time between the Board of Selectmen vote and the Board of Finance vote. Because right now, for all intent and purpose, the Board of Selectmen votes on the 27th, the data gets to the Finance Department, 24 hours, they have to do their job, we get the information, we have to figure out what we're doing, and then next night we're here to vote. So, the first selectman didn't think it was appropriate to move his meetings. So what I did was our normal night, which had been voting, which would have been the 29th. I still leave it on here as a potential voting night, but to give us a little time, I included our April meeting. So the 4-3 meeting, which would be our general meeting afterwards, that's our final, if you will, budget vote date. If we go past the 7th of April, we are not in compliance with the charter. So we have to vote by the 7th. So that's this year.
Chris, let's stop in this year for a second. So the major changes, as I understood it, were the flip-flop between admin and general and finances. We flip-flopped that with the retiree and the admin and general on the 15th, so we gave more time for pension, for OPEB, for health care, for that kind of stuff.
Correct, human resources, right?
And
Yeah.
we moved the not-for-profits and some of the more administrative departments up front.
Correct.
So let's be very clear. 3-1, there's a lot of departments. There doesn't necessarily have to be a lot of discussion, but there's a lot of departments. The other nights, actually, from when you presented it to me, there's not a lot of change. The order, like I just said about OPEB and retiree going more towards the middle of the month, has changed. But in terms of, as your point, the durations haven't changed.
Right. And one other thing, just as a little bit of a savings here, there are a bunch of budget hearings we've done in the past where the same department head needed to be here 2 evenings. I've combined all those together. So Public Works, for example, a lot of times he had to be here twice, or Parks and Rec. I did combine all those, Culture and Recreation, for example, together so that the department head only has to be here 1 evening.
So we've eliminated meetings number 6 and number 7.
Correct.
Which we can hold for snow days, which wasn't last year, but what was it, 2 or 3 years ago, we had, I don't remember, I mean, we had a heck of a lot of snow days.
We had two.
And we were running around trying to find meetings. This already builds it in. And quite frankly, the 22nd, the meeting that we used to hold, that was the meeting where it eventually ended up, we sat around and talked to each other. We really didn't, it was really like a 45-minute meeting.
Is that the public comes, but they just
No.
listen?
No, it's our public discussion
It was,
without
we could
public
get
comment.
together and say, well, I believe this, and I believe that, but quite frankly, we never really used it for that purpose. It was kind of redundant. And we ended up talking to each other and leaving after like 45 minutes. I think
We've canceled it multiple
we've
years.
canceled it multiple years as well. So this is just kind of formalizing that and giving us some flexibility. And Chris is right. Look, if the Board of Selectmen votes on the 26th or 27th, which is their prerogative, and they don't make any big changes, or we feel we can vote the 29th, we vote the 29th. If we have questions, issues, comments, concerns, we actually can bring in department heads on the 29th, get additional information as to what the Board of Selectmen cuts mean to those departments, whether we agree or disagree, and then we can vote on April 3rd, which is already a meeting on our calendar. So all of these meetings are already on our calendars.
That's correct.
So
That's correct.
this year. But I'll be honest, the first night could be a long night. But we get it out of the way, and we eliminate 2 meetings. To me, I thought that was a good idea when
Right.
Chris presented it.
And again, I'd like to reiterate, if we get the budget book early enough, and we can meet in some way and say, man, Shellfish and Historic Commission are all coming in at 0%, I think it's appropriate for us to call them up and say, don't bother coming the first night. For debate.
Can I ask a question? Okay.
Yeah.
So, because it's a long night, has there been any thought in terms of limiting the questions or the time that somebody's speaking or anything like that? Just because sometimes, it helps on the RTM floor, for example, if you limit comments, et cetera. I don't know. Was that something that was discussed?
You know what? I'm against that a little bit. I mean, I understand it, that it could be a long night, and I think I'll do my best to move it along. But I also feel that one of the things that makes us very good is what we do, along with our colleagues on the Board of Selectmen. is letting those discussions go on a little bit. I think it's helpful. Now, I'm hopeful that with those departments, unless there's something dramatic going on, that won't happen, Sheila. But I think that our kind of free form of information exchange there is very helpful. And I'd hate to impinge on that and stop some good conversations. So, you know, the goal would be to move through as quickly as we can and not divert as much as possible. But I would not like to do a formal item on that. That's my own opinion.
And then, Chris, you mentioned you'd get us, like, the details. Are the details just sort of the different department, like a list of
The
the
specific
departments
departments.
and
Yep.
the department numbers? Is that
So,
what you're looking at?
so when we get the normal process, right, it'll say on 3-1, we're going to hear from First Selectman's Office, Town Clerk, FairTV, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, the whole McGilla.
Yeah.
You can send that out through.
Each individual hearing that we would normally have.
So we're not voting on this evening. So this is for discussion only. How are we going to kind of move
Just full
forward in terms
disclosure
of
discussion. We don't have to.
of deciding what to do?
Well, which departments to hear is within my prerogative, because that's the way we've always done it. But we wanted to bring this up and get everybody's take on it. Your comment just now about, hey, I'd appreciate it being shortened, let's make sure, it's all valid. So we just wanted to have a discussion and full disclosure, and then publish it tomorrow and move on. We wanted to get if there was anybody that was dramatically opposed to trying to get out of a couple of meetings. So we just wanted to make sure that we had a full vetting of it.
And I'll add one other thing. So we'll talk about really next year's budget, but this could also serve as a proof of concept, right? We could really do this in 5 nights. If we're sitting here on the 5th night at midnight and we haven't discussed 4 budgets, then guess what? I guess I was wrong. Maybe we do need 6 nights. But as a proof of concept, that'll lead to our next discussion.
And quite frankly, Chris,
Yeah.
if we get to that point, please remember, we're not canceling right now.
Right.
Nights 6, 7, and 8. So they are available to us if we feel, you know what, we do need them.
Yeah,
Right.
we don't have to do anything because they're on the calendar.
Mr. Mottola.
A couple of things. One is, and maybe it's just me, but I don't like talking about departments and major budget things at 11 o'clock at night if we can avoid that. So I would have a big concern about that. If you think the first night's going to be a long night, maybe we should consider starting at 7 instead of 7:30. It's just a thought.
I don't have a problem with that. I don't know if others
I don't know if
do.
everyone else can do it. That's the question. So.
Yeah. Can you do 7?
For one night I could do it, probably not all the nights.
No, I don't think we have to do it all the
Can you
nights.
do 7?
I can do 7.
I can do 7.
I can do 7.
I
It
can
would
do
be,
7.
it would be March 1st,
I
right?
can't do
Are we all agreeing?
7:30.
I'll take 7.
I think that's a good idea for March 1st.
We can do that.
Based on what you're telling us, you think the longest meeting is going to be the March 1st meeting?
There's nothing on the other meetings that's different than
changed.
any other year.
Okay. That's one suggestion.
So- This is the first I've seen this, and I don't remember what it is. I have one really positive comment.
Well,
I really-
Mr. Mottola's actually talking.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Sorry.
And so, who else was on this budget committee besides you and Jim?
The Budget Committee is Mr. Brown and I'm the chairman.
And we're going to have a new appointment tonight.
Okay. All right. So was Kevin on it before he resigned, or Kevin Hopkins?
Kevin was not. The last Democrat on was Mr. Stone.
Okay.
Long-serving
No, I know.
member.
I was here with
and
him.
before Jim was Rob Bolito.
Okay. All right, and we're going to not fix it, but talk about that the next item. All right. So.
I like the idea of 7 PM.
Yeah, that would be my suggestion.
So we can certainly do that for the first night.
And then the thought process going forward would be to have the budget committee meet and talk about next year, and you would have
what we normally do is that right after the budget's happened, now it'll be especially important this year, so we'll meet and say,
Well, let's, hang on
Yeah,
just
we'll
a
get to
second.
that. Yeah, that's right.
let's-
I got
just
you.
want to make sure
Okay,
everybody
thank
gets
you.
an opportunity on this. Thank you,
Yep.
John. Mr. Mayor?
A couple of comments. One, I really liked the idea of fewer meetings. Two, I really like the idea of having more than one day between the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance, because that is one hell of a night. Thirdly, with respect to pension, OPEB, and healthcare, there is no difference, just as an informational item, there's no difference in information available between March 1 and March 15. It'd be the same information. My question, which, when I apologize for interjecting there, if I understood what you said, though, the March 1st would be equivalent to 3 meetings, given last year's schedule? Because you said the
No.
other meetings...
No, so I've taken
You said you've taken out 2 meetings, and you said that
Hang on a
the
minute.
3
Let
are
me
the
answer
same.
Let him answer the question.
Yeah.
right. So I went back 3 or 4 years and looked at how many budgets we did in an individual night. So, for example, the longest night's the first, the second longest is probably the third night. I took those 2 nights that were at the end and redistributed them. Majority went to the first night, because the last night, we always do these, the quick 5-minute harbor commission and shellfish kind of stuff, right? But I haven't combined it in just one night. They're also spread throughout. And again, as I said before too, I did combine a bunch of the rec and other things, so one department head just shows
One
up.
of the interesting ones was, I used to think, and Chris showed me his schedule from previous when he rejiggered it, that we always did police and fire the same night. Chris actually showed me where there's been times when we've done police and fire on separate nights.
Last year.
So we've combined them into one night, and that dropped out.
Yeah, last
We didn't
year we
combine
actually did them
They
separately.
combined them. That's a recommendation.
Right.
Okay.
Thank
Anybody
you for
else?
that, though.
Go
I
ahead.
think it's good that I'm concerned about losing the 2 nights, but the first night's going to be quite a night. But as long as we are not going to, we can ask questions. So whenever we want to ask questions to, I have no problem with it.
Okay.
So we'll try it this year and see how it works.
Now, with that, yes, Mr. Becker.
Yeah, no, I do want to find out, though, on the release of the budget books. They seem to be getting later and later every year, and I know that you guys work hard, and I know that you've probably got your reasoning on that, but it felt like last year was probably the tightest timeline, and really didn't provide that window that we normally get with the book and be able to prepare. So I look at this sort of potential first night, and even an extra day or something in advance is really going to help try to
Do
alleviate
you guys
that.
know, Dave's asking, when are you guys going to have the budget books ready? Do you know? What's the target date?
I think our target date is generally March 1st. And then,
I know.
No, it's
first
got to be
meeting.
a couple days
well,
before.
because the March 1st is generally, it's March 1st because I'm not seeing this, and I'm not prepared to respond to it other than off the
Well,
top of my
the
head.
target date should
But-
never be pass out the books at the first meeting.
Well,
March 1st
because
is
the,
a better
because the
date.
first meeting is generally the first selectman's presentation.
It still is.
It still
Right,
is.
okay, and then it's OPEB, and it's, what do you call
When
it,
can you get the
retirement
budget books to
and
us?
healthcare. So there's no departments on that first night, generally.
I think the problem here
that's-
is
Not true.
to my point, the books, when I first started, and I'm sure with others, maybe it was even earlier, but I'm not going to say mid-February, but certainly closer to third week, maybe a little bit prior. Not since you, but that was the timeline. Totally respect if needs to be
We
a
did.
little bit tighter. I get that, but it keeps going tighter and tighter and tighter, and now we're running up against March 1st. It's like there's just no window there, with departments or not. You still want the book. You want to look at the totality of the situation. You want to have some time with it, preferably over a weekend prior, so Thursday, Friday of the week before. Even there, it was midweek, then it was Thursday, then it was Friday. I mean, it's just, then it was the next week. something's got to be
Yeah, well,
sort of
this,
done there.
this week is the week we get the final information that goes in the budget book, hopefully this week, it'll be Friday of this week, for healthcare, OPEB, and retirement. So we need that information, and then the first of next week, which is the 12th or something like that,
Yeah.
we kind of close it all up and try to get it out the end of that week, which is maybe the 17th or something, and then it goes to the printer theoretically, if all goes well, on the 21st or 22nd. And that takes a week or so. So
Can't we
it's
just-
the end of February.
Bob, can't you just get it to Kinko's and make copies at Kinko's and give it to us? Because if you have the budget book, it's a matter of somebody walking it down and getting it copied. And if you have it done on the
Well, no, it goes to the printer. But, you know, it
But
goes,
it's
I mean, I
Tom
don't know
saying
how
that we don't have to have, the RTM books don't have to be produced. You could run enough books for us who have to start meeting on March 1st, first, priority.
Right.
Because the RTM still has a whole
month.
Yeah,
Plus.
okay, well, I'm not a printer, and I don't know what the process is, but I know they have to set the type, and I don't think it's the printing that takes the time.
It's not.
I
they're
think
not
it's
setting
the,
digital now,
I think
they're
it's the
not setting
typesetting.
type.
Ben Franklin's not
How
doing
many
it. We don't
books?
set type anymore.
How many books are you running at one clip? The initial clip. Even if it was a few hundred an entire
We
week
don't
on
do
that,
a
it
few
doesn't.
hundred.
a long time.
I think we do 50 or
So
something, I don't know.
50 books over.
50 to 100.
I mean, I think to some degree, if it's the printing window, then if
The
you
printer
could go
takes a
back
week.
and find out.
But,
I
yeah,
don't see how
printers
they
should
can-
never take a week
How
in
can they take
today's
a
day and
week with
age.
that? They're not. They're digitally printing. They're digitally printing the. They're
Yeah.
digitally printing the dividers now. I mean, all of that has been.
Let's get 12 copies.
I mean, there's got to be a way to. I'd hate to be the printer
Early.
one, being the, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
If you
I'm
guys, I
listening, I'm
assumed that you
listening.
were,
Yeah.
I assumed you guys were maybe running up to the last deadline on data and trying to get better data, but if the printer's the thing, I mean,
Let me say, it's like, hopefully we'll get the pension and OPEB on Friday.
We understand there's
We'll
data
get healthcare,
concerns,
so,
but.
but
yeah,
you're
printing-
saying, try to truncate that last 2 weeks.
Exactly.
Yeah,
So-
no, I wrote it down.
Is everything else ready to print today?
No, you gotta print, no, because,
you need to find.
no, that's what I said. You get those numbers, you put the whole budget together, you see what it looks like, you
Yeah, you wanna put it
machinate
together.
things,
Yeah,
you
no,
know.
okay.
You gotta get a
Appreciate
final
that.
document. So
let
it's
me
the end-
just
so
say
it's
this.
sometimes, you know, like early next week, middle of next week, end of next week, something.
Okay. Let me just say this. When I looked at the budget, one of the reasons I put the administrative and general on the first night, I didn't intentionally make the first night the longest night, but I was hearing things like we could not get it till March 1st. I thought, so if there's any budgets that I don't want to look at for more, they don't need to look at for more than 5 minutes, it's probably Conservation, Shellfish, and Historic District Commission. So I didn't do this without, there was some thought put into this.
Well, you told me it was because you wanted Sheila to bring the donuts.
Well, that's the other thing. We have to have the donut list, right? And I'm not putting myself, and because of all this effort this year, I'm not putting myself on it, so just.
So the next thing that happened based on that was they started to look at the town charter. What is our requirements? And when we went into it, the thought wasn't to go look at the town charter and do that. The thought was, how do we improve our budget process? But what came to fruition in the discussions was that we actually perhaps hadn't been following the town charter all these years. So, Chris, I'm just going to turn it over to you because you
Sure.
did the legwork, and I know, Jim Walsh, you were a little bit involved as an attorney, so why don't you, go
Sure.
through this, Chris?
So I've reviewed the budget, and of course, I'm not an attorney. But there are two particular sections in the charter that I think make the case that we're not in full compliance today. The first one is 1C3. It says that the select men, which I'm assuming is the board, shall review the budgets of all town officers, commissions, boards, and departments of the town, and make such recommendations in connection with such to the Board of Finance. So that leads you to believe that the Board of Selectmen is presenting us with something. Then, when you go to 12.2B, this is the specific budget section. It's under the topic of recommendations to the Board of Finance. The first selectman shall review the budgets of all town officers, boards, commissions, authorities, and departments of the town required to submit budgets, and shall submit the budgets with recommendations to the Board of Selectmen. The Selectmen, again, which I'm assuming means the board, shall make recommendations to the Board of Finance regarding each budget reviewed by them. So, what it would appear the charter says is that Mr. Tetro is doing what he always does, which is review all the budgets. Then he sits with his board, makes a recommendation to the board, they do some work, and then as a board recommends the budget to us. So,
Well, not later than 2 months before the annual budget.
right, so
So-
in essence, they're supposed to recommend the budget to us by March 7th.
that's correct. So that's the other thing, I apologize, I missed that, right? So that, in this particular year, right, the charter says that the Board of Selectmen has to recommend a budget to us by March 7th, such that we can start our process. So we will not be in compliance with that this year.
Go ahead, Mr. Mottola.
The charter also says in Section C that there can be a variation of procedure that the Board of Selectmen, with the approval of the Board of Finance, may modify and vary the budget submission process in the interest of efficiency or in the event of special circumstances. So it's my understanding that for 10 years, 15 years, we've done it the way we've been doing it, and so that's been
That recommendation
the
has
process.
never been, I've been on the board 10 years, that recommendation has never been made. I actually got a bunch of information. I mean, we used to do it this way. We used to have the Board of Select made a recommendation to the Board of Finance. I'm plowing through a bunch of data to figure out when that actually was. I think it's somewhere in the 80s was the last time that we were in charter compliance, if you will. And funny enough, I think there's been three charter revisions since that point, and no one thought that it was, in the best interest of the town to change the charter to change that, that course of events or that series of events.
Well, something happened where we've been doing it this way for 15 years plus, right?
More?
More.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's appropriate to say that you have been not in compliance, because obviously at some point in time, the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance agreed to do what you're doing. So I don't think it's not in compliance.
I don't think the charter could be clearer on an issue. It's very unclear on a lot of issues.
No, it says what it says.
But it's extremely clear on this process. And to be honest with you, I think the process that's in the charter is a pretty logical charter. It's a pretty logical procedure to follow, because why wouldn't we as a board follow it? Because it allows the first selectman to make his budget, talk to his department heads. He's the CEO of the town. Come to us with that knowledge. Then it goes to the Board of Selectmen, who can have public hearings on it, come up with their recommendations. And they're in a far superior role. I mean, they hear stuff behind closed doors to whatever, to make their recommendations. And then we would get it for 30 days. That's what the charter proposes. Yep. We get it for a full 30 days. And then the RTM gets it for a full 30 days. And the charter specifically sets the date that it's got to be voted on. It's a very logical system that I think should be followed. I think it would shorten the number of our meetings. We could watch their hearings on FairTV, on the Board of Selectmen. I'm sorry, I'm pointing to the first selectman, but he's the only member of the Board of Selectmen that's here. But the first selectman could put together his budget. It can be fully vetted at hearings before the Board of Selectmen, which we can watch and get information on, just like the RTM does with our meetings. Then we would get it. Might be able to shorten our meetings, number of meetings, based on getting information that we don't have to re-ask again. Come up with our recommendation, give it to the RTM. They'll have the advantage of listening to the first selectman, the Board of Selectmen, and us, hopefully shortening their deliberations on it. And then finally make a decision on May 7th, or the first, just the first Monday of the month.
So
And the Board of Selectmen are still ex officio, so they can hang out anytime they want with us.
Without a doubt. They can definitely, I just want to be clear, I'm not saying I don't want them here. They have a full right to come, and I would love for them to come here, because I'd like to ask them why they did what they did. Maybe there's stuff that didn't come out at their board meeting.
Yeah.
That I don't know about, that I can ask them a question. Why did you consider doing this?
I think...
'Cause I might be wrong.
Yeah, I think the issue then, and, you know, I guess we're going to have to discuss this moving forward, is, and you've been here a long time, and I was on the Board of Education. I thought one of the reasons why we had a combined meeting was for efficiency purposes. So what you are proposing right now, and maybe we have to under the charter, is that you would have to have department head, the Board of Selectmen would have to meet and do essentially what we do in March.
They would have
Then
to do
we
it.
would have
they'd
to do it
in
again?
February.
They have to do it in February into March. I mean, I don't know how many nights of hearings that they want. That would be for their process to determine how much time they thought that they would need, what their schedule would be.
The one it's inefficient for, okay, John, to your quote-unquote inefficiency point.
Very inefficient.
Well, no, the ones it's inefficient for are the department heads.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right, it's not inefficient for either the Board of Selectmen or the Board of Finance. It is the department heads. You may have to go to additional meetings if the Board of Selectmen
Right.
held hearings, depending on what they wanted to do before they voted. And Bob, there was one point that gave me pause when I read this, and I'm not an attorney, and I'll defer to the attorneys. But when they did say, or when we said, hey, we're not in compliance with the charter, or whatever we said, so this is my 13th budget year. We've never voted on changing the process,
Correct.
right? So we've never approved annually not following what the charter
Someone
says
must
was-
have before you were even here then, since we've been doing it for 20 years like
But
this,
I
you
don't
said.
think they can, I think the rule is they can't
Early.
encumber a future board by their vote.
I don't know about that. I think if, well, we don't have to get in a discussion about it, but I understand what you're saying.
No, it's just, you know, look, at this point in time, after doing it this way for so many times, we have the charter in front of us. It's worth a discussion.
Yeah, we have to figure it out.
So that's the point, right?
Correct.
And happy to work with the Board of Selectmen on it. Go ahead.
So how realistic is it to have a budget book on February 1st?
Well, we'd have 1 month or 2 months less healthcare, and we wouldn't have our pension and OPEB numbers, and
Unless you asked for them earlier.
it's there's processes. I mean, they kind of, everybody kind of, when I say everybody, and I don't know that, I know that the actuaries and everybody from the healthcare side, which is simple, you know, time has to go by to get the updated, you know, information, the updated experience. So if you have to have starting on February 7th, you have December information is all you have. So you're trying to determine your healthcare costs based upon 6 months of experience, which is not credible experience from that perspective. With respect to the actuarial work, I know that they work with X number of towns, and they kind of gather all this stuff, and it all kind of filters out around the same time for everybody. That doesn't mean it's somehow we couldn't get it earlier. I don't really know. But that's all.
Well, if
If we follow the charter, we'd have it by March 1st.
Right.
I don't
No,
think
so. But I'm just saying, the Board of Selectmen budget would have to be submitted to by March, who has
They'd
to
have
go
to
to
vote on
March
it by
7th?
60 days. They'd have to vote on it 60 days prior.
Yeah, so it has to
the
be
first
voted on
Monday of
by
May.
March 7th.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it means you'd have to start on February 7th, so you just have less history to have a better budget.
Right.
That's all.
But they'd have probably that number that you're looking for
But at the-
now, and they could adjust it, kind of like we get a number at the end of March.
Well, by the end, I mean, I
You
don't
have
want to put this.
33% more healthcare experience.
We would be ending the budget on the exact same day we end the budget on now.
Right.
Which is the day that the RTM.
Right. I'm
So from an information standpoint, the various bodies might not have the information.
Correct. That's what I'm
Right.
saying.
Right. Got it. It's not for us to discuss tonight, but this is something that we need to decide this spring.
So what I would say, and I think you're right, and the subcommittee should take into consider, I assume the subcommittee's going to look at this, right?
They'll talk about it, correct?
That obviously take into consideration the concerns of the Department of Finance, the Board of Selectmen, any first selectman, whoever that may be in the future, and look at that Section C, because maybe we can agree on a variation of the process that satisfies some of the concerns that some board members have on this. That's just my thought on that.
Part of the problem, I will just tell you, is that I have with the process is that the distance between the Board of Selectmen voting and actually what happens at their afternoon meeting. I'm working, you're working, we're all working while they're meeting. Comes out, they're scrambling to get us something by the next
Don't
day.
disagree.
And then they hand it to us. I haven't even had a chance to watch, it's probably not even up on FairTV.
No.
And if it is, there's no time to watch
Last year
the
it was
hearings.
not.
We fixed it for this
The
year.
the end of the process, the very end of
It's
the
tight.
process, quite frankly, it's very unfair to the members of this board. And I'm not blaming, that's not I'm not casting aspersions or anything. It's a very unfair process to the members of this board to say, here a budget for 30 days, let us change it and give you 24 hours to review the changes that we've made. That's just not right. That piece of it.
And Chris said that he tried to work with Mike on it, to move it up a week to one of these snow days, and Mike was unwilling to move it. Maybe he'd move it up 24 hours, but maybe not.
But you're getting the same result because we're moving our vote back like 6-7 days later, right? So
We are now.
you're
Right, but
you are getting the time period here. So
Well,
This year.
this year,
The goal that was imposed on the committee by the chairman was, don't make this process longer. So that 3/29 was an end stop.
It's true, I did say that.
I tried my best to not make it an end stop. It was only at the point where the first selectman said, you know what, we're unwilling to move our meeting back a week.
Their vote.
That I called up the chairman and said, listen, I know we've got till the 7th. I said, I think we should at least give ourselves a weekend, because that, 3/29 to 4/3 gives us a weekend, right? Inserts a weekend in the process, and then it gives the finance department more than 24 hours to.
And by the way, it's not a great week because there's holy days, that's Holy
This
Week.
just happens
and
to
all
be
that.
Easter weekend,
Right,
just as as a side, right?
And I think the way you've got our vote makes sense. It gives us more time. But had you moved the Board of Selectmen vote up, or had the Board of Selectmen agreed to that, we have a public budget comment session on the 24th, which I'm sure the Board of Selectmen would be interested in hearing comments from the public before making their vote. So I can
Sometimes they don't
understand-
even come.
Well, even so, I mean, personally, I would think that they would want to be there or watch it, have time, before, watch it on TV before making their vote. I'm just saying that might be a very strong rationale to keep the Board of Selectmen vote where it is. Regardless, I think that moving the Board of Finance vote later buys us that time to absorb what the Board of Selectmen have said during their vote. Or their rationale.
This is a unique year in that this is usually late in the process. The reason it's not the 17th is for obvious reasons. It's the High Holy Day on the 17th of St. Patrick's Day. So we moved it later in the process, right? So if you want to hang your hat on that for this year, okay, fine. But it's. I don't think it would be an issue any other year.
I'm just saying, public comment that's when you hear, it's not just for the Board of Finance, I think it's for everybody. And I think it's a very important meeting, for me it is. And so I'm thinking that's why they may not have wanted to move it. That's my.
The Board of Selectmen should
they
have
could
a
have
public
asked.
comment. I think the 3 Board of Selectmen members should have to sit there before the public and have a couple of 100 or 300 people show up and talk about the budget and about what you're doing to their kids or how much you're going to send a senior out of this town. I think they should actually do that. But this is our meeting, the public hearing one.
Right, I'm not going to
No, we don't.
I'm not going to disagree with that, but
No, we
that's not what
created
we're
it.
discussing. We're discussing.
That is not a required meeting, by the way.
That is not
Just,
required.
that is not a required meeting.
What, to have the public comment?
The Board of Finance shall hold a public hearing on the budget during the month of March of each year. That's not.
These are public
This
hearings.
is this is a public meeting.
Yeah, that was a meeting that we put in.
It also says that we're supposed to publicize
in
the
there 'cause
budget
some
in
seniors
a
complained that they couldn't
paper
make it
of
at night.
local distribution.
I saw
And so we threw that in on
That's what we
Saturday.
just said.
Guarantee what happened is, that at some point, before any of us were sitting around, whoever was on the Board of Selectmen, the Board of Finance at the time, thought from an efficiency standpoint, it'd be better to do what we've been doing for 20 years. I bet that's what happened, so.
I can't deny
Yeah.
that that's probably what happened, but it's always good to
But-
revisit it.
But I have to say it again. Since the time that I believe the last time we were in compliance, right? There's been 3 charter revisions, major revisions, not just thee to thou and, whatever.
It's a very fair point.
And it's never changed. No one thought it was important enough to say, hey, you know what, the last 5 years, that budget's been really going good, let's change the charter.
And to Mr. Walsh's earlier point, our charter is very vague on certain things. It's not vague on this.
I mean, think about this. It says the RTM, let's say the RTM's a stopping point. 30 days back, Board of Finance, you got to do something. 60 days back, Board of Selectmen, you got to do something. There's not a whole lot of things in there that are that specific in this charter. And by the way, the RTM has to meet by the 4th, was it the 4th Monday of the?
Whatever it is.
Of May, the first Monday in May, right?
Go ahead.
I just want to add the point too, is I can remember years when we used to get the budget in a binder form.
Yeah.
And it wasn't formally bound yet, and we used to get it in February. And then later on, they would come out with the bound copy. We would start our meetings in February.
I do remember getting the budget books much earlier. Yeah, when we first started. Thank you, Mary.
I just think the way we're handling the budget now is not anywhere near what the framers of this system ever envisioned. It's just not. They would have written it differently.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Good discussion. We'll send out the detailed budget schedule. And again, there might be a couple late nights in there. Might not be. We'll see. We'll get through it. We always do. Then, committee assignments. Discuss Board of Finance subcommittee assignments. This was something that Mrs. Marmion brought up right before the holiday, and thank you for that. So our audit committee is Mary LeClaire, David Becker, and John Matola. Our reporting committee is Jim Brown, Jim Walsh, and Liz Esmond. Our budget committee is Chris DeWitt, Jim Brown, and Sheila. And our fund committee is Jim Walsh, Mary LeClaire, and John Matola again.
What's that last one?
Fund balance.
Oh, I thought you said fun committee.
That's what we call it privately. That's what we call it privately, John. That's what we call it privately when we get to the meetings.
You're going to go meet at the...
It depends on what you use the funds for. All right.
No, we can start.
Yes.
Make a motion.
Because we had fallen down on that. Now, some of those committees will meet regularly. Some of those committees might not meet at all until an issue comes up.
And are you publicly noticing these meetings and the agenda?
Yes, they get publicly noticed. They
So-
do.
Okay.
Yeah, the audit committee meetings are...
Yes, technically.
Yes, say yes, Chris, yes.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
the right answer.
So, to hear, consider, and act upon other communications. Here is the other communications we have. Today, we received our audit books from our auditors. We will be discussing these at our quarterly meetings later this month, the 27th. So, get out your reading glasses, ladies and gentlemen, and we'll go through them on the 27th. Correct, Mr. Mayor?
Correct.
Auditors are scheduled to be here. Any questions, comments, concerns on any other business we have
Yeah,
tonight?
just one communication, if you will, from myself.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor, I forgot.
Yeah. So every year when we have our rating agency meetings, I get a formal question, do you have a formal policy on debt issuance? The answer is, we have an informal policy, and I kind of explain what it is. So what I did was drafted up a one-pager, which I think is pretty, to pass out for you guys to look at and hopefully vote on. It's pretty straightforward, pretty understandable, and pretty easy. And the reason I have, when we were talking earlier about the policy on bonding and capital purchasing, is I made that an appendix to this policy, because they work in
Excellent.
conjunction with each other. So I'm just going to pass out.
Do I have? Yeah, please.
I don't know if you want to call the internet a correspondence, but can we get an update on this possible another $1 million worth of cut by the state? And I'm confused, is that this fiscal year, that budget that we're executing right now, or next year's? I think it's this
funny
year, right?
because they talk about fiscal year 2019 in all the releases, so it's confused me. Mr.
Yeah.
Mayor, could you follow up on that for us and get back to us? Okay, it came out yesterday. Well, it says 1819, right? I mean, I've seen various press reports. It's pretty confusing, actually.
Yeah, it's the governor's budget adjustments is finally, this is his third mitigation budget, if you want to call it that, since the allotted budget, which is the budget we're using in our budget. The state budget we're using is the allotted budget. But this latest iteration has us losing the full ECS, which is $1,097,000 for next year.
So it's not the budget we're executing now?
No, it's not now. It has us losing all of our pilot, I think, which is like $329,000, and it has something else. It's about a 1.5 net reduction.
So for the budget that we're going to start talking about in March?
Yes.
Okay.
So for July 1st, 2018, that.
Right, based upon what I'm building the budget on, based upon what I'm building the budget on today, it's $1.5 million less. In talking to various people, no one thinks it's going to be the budget. It's the governor's.
Well, thank you for the clarification, because I was unclear if it was
Robin Hood.
You know.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Any other questions, comments? Seeing none, do I have a motion? We'll take Ms. Esmond. Do I have a second? Mr. Mottola? All in favor of adjournment? Opposed? Abstentions? We're done. Good night, everybody.